She was sold as lady's companion to pay her father's debts, but in the Duke's arms she found freedom. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining us from, and subscribe if you love romantic stories like this. Now let's fall into this tale together. The November rain had been falling for 3 days when Mr. Bartholomew Winters arrived at the Hartley cottage in the village of Ashford, Kent. Through the rain-streaked window, 19-year-old Violet Hartley watched the elegant black carriage bearing the Ravencrest crest come to a stop outside their modest home. Her stomach twisted with dread. She'd known this day would come, had been counting down to it with a mixture of resignation and fear, but knowing hadn't made it any easier. Inside, the cottage felt suffocatingly small. Her father, William Hartley, sat at the scarred kitchen table, shoulders hunched as if under a physical weight. Her mother, Margaret, Maggie to family, stood by the fireplace, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. 8-year-old Lily played quietly in the corner with her worn rag doll, sensing the tension even if she didn't fully understand it. Mr. Winters entered without knocking, shaking rain from his expensive coat. He was precisely what Violet had expected. Perfectly tailored clothing, cold eyes that assessed everything with clinical detachment, an air of superiority that filled the small room like fog. Mr. Hartley. He didn't bother with pleasantries as he set his leather case on the table. "Shall we conclude our business?" William gestured weakly to a chair. "Please, sit." Mr. Winters remained standing. "That won't be necessary. The terms are straightforward. Your eldest daughter will enter service at Ravencrest Hall in Derbyshire as lady's companion to His Grace, the Duke of Ravencrest. Term of service, 2 years. Compensation, £10 quarterly, paid directly to your household, room, board, and appropriate attire provided. At the conclusion of the 2-year period, the debt of £300 will be considered satisfied." The words fell like stones into water, creating ripples that would reshape all their lives. Violet had known the terms. Her father had told her weeks ago, voice-breaking, but hearing them spoken so coldly made them unbearably real. 2 years, 730 days away from her family, serving in the household of a man she'd never met, a duke whose generosity in accepting this arrangement was the only thing standing between her family and complete ruin. "The girl is healthy," Mr. Winters's gaze finally landed on Violet, assessing her as one might evaluate a horse at market. No infirmities, no conditions that might impair her duties. Shame burned through Violet's chest like acid. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly despite the humiliation churning in her stomach. "I am perfectly healthy, sir, and quite capable of performing any duties required of me." Something flickered in Mr. Winters's expression, surprise and perhaps, at her boldness. He studied her a moment longer, chestnut hair pulled back severely, green eyes that refused to drop in submission, a simple grey dress that was clean but showed signs of careful mending. "She can read and write," William said quickly, desperately. "Her mother taught her. She speaks some French. Her mother's family, you see, before they came to England. She can keep accounts. She's organized. Never been sick a day in her life." "Mr. Hartley," Mr. Winters' voice cut through the rambling. "His Grace requires a companion, not a governess. The girl's accomplishments, while admirable, are largely irrelevant to her position." Violet felt something hot and defiant flare beneath her breastbone. Irrelevant. As if the hours her mother had spent teaching her to read, the books she'd treasured, the education she'd fought for, as if none of it mattered because she was being sent away as payment for her father's debts. "I understand the position perfectly, sir," Violet said, voice steady though her hands trembled. "And I accept the terms." "Violet," her mother began, voice thick with tears. "It's all right, Mama." Violet kept her eyes on Mr. Winters. When do I leave?" "Tomorrow dawn." He pulled papers from his case, laying them on the table with crisp efficiency. "Mr. Hartley, sign here acknowledging the terms. Miss Hartley, sign here acknowledging that you enter service of your own free will." Of your own free will. The words were almost laughable, as if she had any choice when her father's warehouse had burned to the ground, taking with it his entire stock of imported fabrics. As if she had any choice when the investments he'd made in good faith had collapsed, leaving them drowning in debt. As if she had any choice when her mother had begun taking in washing to keep food on the table, when Lily's dresses had been patched so many times they were more thread than fabric. But Violet took the pen and signed in clear, careful script, Violet Elizabeth Hartley. Her father's signature beside hers shook so badly it was barely legible. Mr. Winters counted out £10, the first quarter's payment, and left the coins glinting on the table like blood money. The carriage will collect Miss Hartley at dawn. One trunk only. She'll be provided appropriate attire at Ravencrest Hall. He snapped his case shut. His Grace does not tolerate tardiness. When the door closed behind him, the silence was crushing. William made a sound like a wounded animal and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Violet knelt beside his chair, taking his calloused hands in hers. "Papa, look at me, please." When he finally raised his head, the anguish in his eyes nearly broke her. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "You're my daughter, my little girl, and I'm sending you away like you're doing what you must to keep this family together," Violet said firmly, though her own throat burned with unshed tears. "The fire wasn't your fault. The failed investments, you couldn't have known. You did your best. But you shouldn't pay for my mistakes. You should be here, making a match, planning a future. I will have a future. In 2 years, I'll come home." She squeezed his hands. "It's not forever, Papa, just 2 years." But even as she spoke the words, she could see in his eyes, in all their eyes, the unspoken truth they were all too afraid to voice. Young women who entered service in wealthy bachelor households rarely came back unchanged. Their reputations, once damaged, could never be fully restored. A lady's companion might be a respectable position in name, but everyone knew the dangers. Everyone knew the assumptions that would be made. Violet was being sent away to save her family, but what would be left of her when she returned? That night, Violet worked by candlelight, packing her few belongings into the old trunk that had once belonged to her grandmother. 3 dresses, 2 grey, 1 black, all carefully mended, undergarments, chemises, a nightgown, her mother's wedding handkerchief, a small volume of poetry her father had given her for her 16th birthday, which she wrapped carefully in a shawl before tucking it at the bottom of the trunk, where prying eyes wouldn't find it. She was placing her hairbrush, the silver one her grandfather had given her mother, when soft footsteps sounded behind her. "Vi!" Violet turned to find Lily in the doorway, clutching her rag doll, her green eyes, so like Violet's own, wide and frightened. "What are you doing awake, little one?" Violet tried to keep her voice light. "It's well past your bedtime." "You're packing." Lily's voice trembled. "You're leaving. You promised you wouldn't leave me." "Oh, Lily." Violet opened her arms and Lily ran into them, small body shaking. "I'm not leaving forever, just for a little while." "How long?" 2 years. 2 years. Lily pulled back, tears streaming down her face. "That's forever. I'll be 10 years old. You'll miss my birthday and Christmas and everything." Her voice rose to a wail. "Please don't go. Please, Vi." Violet held her sister tight, stroking her hair, trying not to let her own tears fall. "Listen to me. 2 years will go by faster than you think, and I'll write every week, every single week. I promise. Mama will read you my letters. It will be like I'm still here. It won't be the same." Lily's voice was muffled against Violet's shoulder. "Who will tell me stories before bed? Who will help me with my reading?" "Mama will. And you're already such a good reader. You barely need my help anymore. By the time I come back, you'll probably be reading novels." "I don't want to read novels without you." Violet's throat closed completely. She held Lily until the small body stopped shaking, until the sobs quieted to hiccups, until finally, mercifully, Lily's breathing evened into sleep. Only then did Violet allow herself to cry. Silent tears that soaked her pillow as she lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling of the room she'd shared with Lily all her life. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would climb into a stranger's carriage and ride away to an uncertain future. Tomorrow, the girl she had been would cease to exist. Her mother came to her room in the darkest hour before dawn, carrying a small cloth-wrapped package. "Ah, Mama, you should be sleeping." "As if I could sleep." Maggie's voice was rough with tears, but her hands were steady as she unfastened the tarnished silver locket from around her own neck. "Your grandmother wore this every day of her life. She gave it to me on my wedding day, and now I'm giving it to you." The locket was old, the silver worn smooth in places from decades of touch. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, Violet's grandparents on their wedding day, young and full of hope. "Mama, I can't take this." "You can, and you will." Maggie fastened it around Violet's neck with fierce determination. "I need you to remember something. Violet Elizabeth Hartley, Your grandmother, she was a groom's daughter at Thornhill Estate. Your grandfather was head groom there. Working people, both of them, but respected, good at what they did. Your grandfather had a gift with horses that the gentry came from miles around to see. Violet had heard these stories before, but she listened again, hungry for the connection to her family's past. When your grandmother died, the Countess of Thornhill herself came to the funeral, sat with the servants and wept like she'd lost family. You know why? Maggie gripped Violet's shoulders. Because your grandmother treated everyone, high or low, with dignity. And she expected the same in return. She never let anyone make her feel small, never. I'll try, Mama. Don't try. Do. Maggie's voice was fierce. You come from strong people, Violet. People who survived and endured. Your grandfather broke wild horses that no one else could touch. Your grandmother raised 5 children and never once bent under the weight. That strength is in your blood, in your bones. She pulled Violet into a crushing embrace. I don't let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. Don't let anyone break you. And if they try, her voice dropped to a whisper, if anyone tries to hurt you, to force you to do anything against your will, you leave. You come straight home. Do you understand? The debt be damned. You come home. I will, Mama. I promise. They held each other as the darkness outside began to lighten to grey, as the first birds began their morning songs, as the world turned inexorably toward the moment of parting. At dawn, the Ravencrest carriage returned. The whole family stood in the doorway, her father looking a decade older than his 50 years, her mother dry-eyed now but trembling, Lily crying softly into her mother's skirts. Violet kissed each of them, committing to memory the feel of her father's weathered cheek, her mother's familiar scent of lavender soap, the softness of Lily's hair. 2 years, she whispered. I'll be home in 2 years. She climbed into the carriage without looking back, because if she looked back, she would lose all her hard-won composure. The driver, a taciturn man who hadn't spoken a word, clicked to the horses, and the carriage lurched into motion. Only when they'd turned the corner and her family was out of sight did Violet allow herself to look back, to see the empty street, the closed door of the only home she'd ever known. Only then did she let the tears fall. The journey from Kent to Derbyshire took the better part of 2 days. They stopped once at a coaching inn, where Violet was given a small room and a cold supper. The driver made it clear through his silence that he had no interest in conversation. Violet was grateful for that. She had no desire to make small talk while her world was being torn apart. The English countryside rolled by outside the carriage window, autumn brown fields, villages that grew smaller and more scattered as they travelled north, the land rising gradually into hills and then proper mountains. The Peak District loomed in the distance, dark and imposing against the grey November sky. Violet tried to read her poetry book, but the words swam before her eyes. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's tear-stained face, heard her father's broken apologies, felt her mother's fierce embrace. Finally, as afternoon light slanted golden across the hills, the driver spoke for the first time. There, Ravencrest Hall. Violet leaned forward to look out the window, and her breath caught. The estate sprawled across the top of a gentle hill like a sleeping giant. The main house was built of honey-coloured stone that glowed almost golden in the afternoon light, 3 stories tall with wide terraces, and dozens of mullioned windows that caught and reflected the sun. Formal gardens spread on either side, still showing the last vestiges of autumn colour. And beyond the house, stretching as far as Violet could see, were paddocks and pastures where horses grazed peacefully. It was beautiful, impossibly, heartbreakingly beautiful, and it was to be her prison for the next 2 years. The carriage didn't stop at the grand front entrance with its imposing stone steps and carved oak doors. Instead, it continued around to the back of the house, to a smaller door marked by its plainness as the servants' entrance. Of course, she might have the title Lady's Companion, but she was essentially a servant. This was her place. The carriage came to a stop, and before the driver could climb down to open the door, a woman emerged from the house. She was perhaps 50, with steel grey hair pulled back in a severe bun beneath a starched white cap. Her dress was black, covered by an immaculate white apron. Her face was lined and weathered, suggesting years of hard work. But when she smiled, her whole face transformed. "You must be Miss Hartley," she said, her voice carrying a soft Scottish burr that immediately warmed something in Violet's chest. "I'm Mrs. Ferguson, housekeeper of Ravencrest Hall. Welcome, lass. You must be exhausted from your journey. Violet climbed out of the carriage, legs stiff from 2 days of travel, and found herself face to face with genuine kindness. It was so unexpected after Mr. Winters's coldness, after 2 days of the driver's silence, that Violet felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson. None of this, Mrs. Ferguson business, when it's just us. You can call me Ferguson, or just Ferg if you're feeling friendly. She took Violet's trunk from the driver with surprising strength. Come inside. I've tea ready, and you'll want to wash the road dust off before I show you around. The servants' quarters of Ravencrest Hall were far grander than Violet had expected. The kitchen was enormous, with a vast stone fireplace, gleaming copper pots hanging from hooks, and a massive wooden table that could seat a dozen people. 2 young women were working there, one kneading bread dough, the other chopping vegetables. Molly, Annie, Mrs. Ferguson called. Can I come meet Miss Hartley? The women looked up, and Violet was relieved to see friendly curiosity rather than resentment in their faces. Molly was plump and rosy-cheeked, with flour dusting her apron and a warm smile. Welcome to Ravencrest, miss. Oh, it'll be lovely to have another woman about. We were starting to feel outnumbered, weren't we, Annie? Annie was thin and sharp-featured, but her smile seemed genuine. Don't mind Molly. She exaggerates. But yes, welcome. You're a brave one, coming all this way. I'm not sure brave is the word, Violet said quietly. Mrs. Ferguson pressed a cup of steaming tea into her hands. Sit, lass. Catch your breath. Then I'll show you the house. The tea was strong and sweet, warming Violet from the inside out. She hadn't realized how cold she was until the warmth began to seep into her bones. You'll have questions, Mrs. Ferguson said, settling into the chair across from her. So let me answer some before you ask. His Grace the Duke is 32 years old. He inherited the title 5 years ago when his father passed. He's a serious man, keeps mostly to himself, but he's fair, treats the staff with respect, pays decent wages, doesn't tolerate cruelty. You'll like him well enough, I think. Is he? Violet hesitated. Is he married? No, miss. Though there's been talk of an engagement. Lady Penelope Danbury, daughter of Lord Danbury of London, but nothing's been settled yet. Mrs. Ferguson's expression suggested she had opinions about Lady Penelope, but she kept them to herself. His Grace's mother, the Dowager Duchess Helena, lives in Bath most of the year. She visits occasionally, and my duties? You'll serve as lady's companion, though as there's no lady of the house at present, your duties will be more general, maintaining the library, helping with correspondence, organizing the household accounts when needed. Light work, really. His Grace specifically requested someone educated who could help manage his books. Violet's heart lifted slightly. The library. Mrs. Ferguson's stern expression softened into something almost motherly. Ah, I thought you might be a reader. His Grace is the same. Spends hours in that library when he's not out with the horses. You'll be responsible for keeping it organized, dusting the shelves, that sort of thing. But, she leaned forward conspiratorially, between you and me, His Grace believes books exist to be read, not to gather dust. If you'd like to read in your spare time, he won't mind. In fact, I think he'd be pleased. It was too much, the kindness, the relief, the unexpected mercy of being allowed near books again. Violet felt her carefully maintained composure crack. I'm sorry, she whispered, setting down her teacup with shaking hands. I'm being foolish. You're being human, lass. Mrs. Ferguson reached across and squeezed her hand. You've been sent away from your family to work off your father's debts. You're allowed to feel what you're feeling. No one here will judge you for it. I don't want to seem weak. Tears aren't weakness. Holding yourself together when everything's falling apart, that's strength. Mrs. Ferguson's grip tightened. My own daughter is about your age. Lives in Edinburgh with her husband now. When she left home, I cried for a week. Couldn't help it. So I understand your mother, and I understand you. The sympathy was almost harder to bear than coldness would have been. Violet had armored herself against cruelty, but she had no defense against kindness. Come, Mrs. Ferguson said gently, releasing her hand. Let me show you the house. The Duke's out riding, won't be back until supper. You'll have time to settle in before you meet him. Ravencrest Hall was even more magnificent than its exterior had suggested. Mrs. Ferguson led Violet through a warren of corridors and rooms, each more impressive than the last. The formal dining room with its table that could seat 20, set with china so fine Violet was afraid to breathe near it. The morning room done in cream and gold. flooded with light from tall windows. The drawing room with its massive fireplace and comfortable furniture arranged for conversation. His Grace doesn't entertain much. Mrs. Ferguson explained as they climbed the main staircase, wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast, with a crimson runner and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. Keeps to himself, mostly, has a few close friends who visit occasionally, but he prefers quiet to society. The second floor held the private chambers. Mrs. Ferguson pointed out the Duke's rooms. Violet glimpsed dark wood furniture and forest green curtains through a partially open door, and several guest chambers, all immaculate and clearly unused. And then Mrs. Ferguson opened a pair of double doors, and Violet forgot to breathe. The library occupied the entire south wing of the second floor, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books in every direction, leather-bound volumes in shades of burgundy, forest green, deep blue, brown. A rolling ladder for reaching the highest shelves, tall windows letting in floods of afternoon light, a massive oak table in the center of the room, surrounded by comfortable leather chairs worn soft with use. The smell of old paper and leather and beeswax polish filled the air. Violet had never seen so many books in one place in her entire life. "I see you like it," Mrs. Ferguson said, smiling at Violet's expression. Violet couldn't find words. "I've never—" His Grace's father was a great collector. His Grace himself has added substantially to it. There must be 3,000 volumes here, perhaps more. Mrs. Ferguson walked to one of the windows. "You'll be responsible for maintaining it, dusting the shelves, organizing new acquisitions, keeping everything in order. His Grace has a particular system, which I'll explain to you. But as I said, if you'd like to read in your free time, you're welcome to do so. Just take care with the books. Some of them are quite valuable." Violet ran her fingers reverently along a shelf of poetry volumes. Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, authors she'd heard of but never been able to afford. "I'll be very careful." "I know you will, lass." Mrs. Ferguson touched her shoulder gently. "Come, I'll show you your room, and then you can rest before supper." The servants' quarters were on the 3rd floor, up a narrower staircase. The corridors here were plainer, the walls bare plaster rather than papered silk, but everything was clean and well maintained. "This will be yours," Mrs. Ferguson said, opening a door at the end of the corridor. The room was small but not cramped, a narrow bed with a thick mattress and clean white linens, a dresser with a small mirror above it, a chair by the window, a washstand with a basin and pitcher. The walls were whitewashed, the floor bare wood with a small rag rug beside the bed. It was Spartan compared to what Violet had glimpsed of the house below, but it was clean and private and infinitely better than she'd feared. "Thank you," Violet said softly. "Supper's at 7 in the servants' hall. You'll eat with the staff. There's about a dozen of us all told. His Grace dines at 8 in the small dining room. You won't be required to serve him until you've settled in." Mrs. Ferguson paused at the door. "Rest if you can, lass. I know it's been a long journey." When the door closed, Violet sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. Through the small window, she could see the paddock stretching away toward the distant hills. Horses, sleek, beautiful creatures, grazed peacefully in the golden afternoon light. Beyond them, the Peak District rose like a wall against the sky, mountains that seemed to stand guard over this little pocket of the world. She was far from home, far from everyone she loved, far from everything she'd ever known. But perhaps, it wouldn't be as terrible as she'd feared. She unpacked her trunk slowly, finding places for her few possessions. The family portrait, a daguerreotype taken 5 years ago when times had been better, went on the dresser where she would see it every morning. The poetry book went under her mattress, a secret comfort. Her grandmother's locket stayed around her neck, warm against her skin. And as twilight fell and shadows lengthened across the room, Violet made herself a promise. She would survive these 2 years. She would work hard, send money home, and return with her dignity intact. No matter what happened, she would not break. She would not let this place, beautiful as it was, destroy who she was. That first night, exhausted from travel but too anxious to sleep, Violet lay in her narrow bed and listened to the house settling around her, footsteps in distant corridors, the creak of old wood, wind rattling the window panes. Somewhere far below, a door closed with a soft thud. She thought of her family, of Lily crying herself to sleep, of her mother lying awake worrying, of her father carrying the weight of guilt like stones in his pockets. She thought of the £10 Mr. Winters had left on their table, a fortune to them now, but such a small fraction of what was owed. She thought of the library downstairs, with its thousands of books waiting to be discovered, and she thought, for just a moment, of the man who owned all of this. The Duke of Ravencrest, 32 years old, serious, fair, a lover of books and horses. Tomorrow she would meet him. Tomorrow her new life would truly begin. For better or worse, there was no turning back now. Violet woke to soft knocking on her door and Mrs. Ferguson's gentle Scottish burr. 6 o'clock, lass. Time to start the day. The November morning was bitterly cold. Frost had painted intricate patterns on her small window overnight, and her breath misted in the chilly air. Violet dressed quickly in one of her grey dresses, pinned her chestnut hair into a severe bun, and splashed icy water on her face from the basin on the washstand. Her reflection in the small mirror looked pale and anxious. First day, she reminded herself. Just get through the first day. Downstairs in the vast kitchen, warmth enveloped her like an embrace. The massive fireplace blazed cheerfully, and the smell of fresh bread and strong tea filled the air. Molly was already at work, kneading dough with practiced efficiency, while Annie stirred something fragrant in a pot on the range. "Good morning, miss," Molly called out cheerfully. "Tea's ready, and there's fresh bread with butter. You'll want a good breakfast. Mrs. Ferguson works as hard, she does." "I heard that, Molly Turner," Mrs. Ferguson said as she entered, but there was no heat in her words. She set a steaming cup of tea in front of Violet. "Don't mind her. She exaggerates terribly. Now eat up, Miss Hartley. I'll show you the library first, as that's where you'll spend most of your time." Violet tried to eat, but her stomach was knotted with nerves. She managed half a slice of bread and some tea before Mrs. Ferguson gestured for her to follow. "His Grace rode out early this morning," the housekeeper said as they climbed the stairs. "He does that most days. Checks on the horses before breakfast. He'll be back by 10, I expect, so you'll have time to familiarize yourself with the library before you meet him." They reached the second floor, and Mrs. Ferguson opened the double doors to the library. In the morning light streaming through the tall windows, it was even more magnificent than Violet remembered. Dust motes danced in golden shafts of sunlight, and the leather-bound books seemed to glow with promise. "His Grace has a particular system," Mrs. Ferguson explained, walking along the shelves. "Fiction is organized alphabetically by author along this wall. History and philosophy here, poetry and plays there. The natural sciences and agricultural texts are on the far wall. He's very particular about the organization, so don't move anything without noting where it came from." Violet nodded, already mentally cataloguing the volumes she could see. Wordsworth, Shakespeare, Milton, authors she'd only dreamed of reading. "Your duties are straightforward," Mrs. Ferguson continued. "Dust the shelves daily. Use this cloth. It's specially treated so it won't damage the leather. Once a week, you'll polish the furniture. If His Grace requests a particular book, you'll fetch it for him. And if any new volumes arrive, you'll catalogue them in this ledger here." She indicated a large leather-bound book on the desk. "Think you can manage?" "Yes, Mrs. Ferguson." "Good lass." The housekeeper's expression softened. "And remember what I said yesterday. If you'd like to read in your spare time, His Grace won't object. Just be careful with the books, and always return them to their proper places." After Mrs. Ferguson left, Violet stood alone in the magnificent library, almost afraid to move. She'd never been in a room like this, never been surrounded by so much knowledge, so many stories waiting to be discovered. Finally, she picked up the treated cloth and began to dust, starting with the lowest shelves. She worked methodically, carefully, but she couldn't help reading the titles as she went. Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, Miss Austen's novels, all of them. Violet had only ever read Pride and Prejudice, borrowing a battered copy from the village lending library. She was so absorbed in examining the poetry section, Byron, Shelley, Keats, all there, that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching down the corridor. "Do you read?" The voice, deep, cultured, and entirely unexpected, made Violet jump so violently she nearly dropped the book she'd been holding. She spun around, heart hammering, to find a tall man standing in the doorway. He was perhaps 32, as Mrs. Ferguson had said, but he looked younger in that moment. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He wore riding clothes, buckskin breeches, tall boots, and a coat that had seen better days, all covered in a fine layer of dust. His face was lean and angular, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed by morning stubble. But it was his eyes that caught Violet's attention. Deep brown, intelligent, and fixed on her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was the Duke of Ravencrest, her employer, the man she would serve for the next 2 years. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Violet stammered, hastily replacing the book on the shelf. Her hands trembled as she dropped into a curtsy. "I was just dusting. I shouldn't have. I asked you a question, miss." He moved into the room with easy grace, his boots silent on the thick carpet. "Hartley, Your Grace, Violet Hartley." She kept her eyes lowered, as was proper. "And yes, I can read, Your Grace. Look at me." The command was quiet but unmistakable. Violet raised her eyes slowly, reluctantly, and found him studying her with that same intense focus. "You were looking at the Keats," he observed. "Do you enjoy poetry?" This was dangerous territory. She should demur, claim ignorance, play the role of the simple servant. But something in his expression, genuine curiosity rather than condescension, made her answer honestly. "I've only read a little, Your Grace. My mother taught me when I was young. She had a small volume of poems that had belonged to her mother." Violet hesitated, then added, "I've always loved Keats, particularly Ode to a Nightingale. The way he writes about beauty and mortality, about the desire to escape into something transcendent." She trailed off, realizing she was rambling. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I'm speaking out of turn." But the Duke didn't look offended. If anything, his expression had softened into something almost like surprise. "You understand Keats. Truly understand him. Not just the surface meaning." Yes, Your Grace. At least I think I do." He moved closer, and Violet had to fight the urge to step back. He reached past her and pulled the Keats volume from the shelf, leafing through it with obvious familiarity. Most people read that poem and see only the romance of it. They miss the melancholy underneath, the knowledge that beauty is fleeting, that joy is always tinged with sorrow. "Yes," Violet breathed, forgetting for a moment to be cautious. "Exactly. The nightingale's song is beautiful, but the poet knows he can't truly join it. He's bound to mortality, to suffering. The beauty makes the pain sharper, not less." The Duke's eyes met hers, and for a moment something passed between them, a spark of recognition, of shared understanding. Then he seemed to catch himself and stepped back, closing the book. "You're William Hartley's daughter," he said, his tone becoming more formal. Violet's stomach dropped. Here it was, the acknowledgement of why she was really here. "Yes, Your Grace. I knew your father slightly. He supplied fabrics to several estates in Kent. Fine quality goods." The Duke paused. "I was sorry to hear about the fire, a terrible misfortune." The sympathy in his voice was unexpected, and somehow harder to bear than coldness would have been. "Thank you, Your Grace. And your family, your mother and sister, are well as can be expected, Your Grace." Violet kept her voice steady with effort. "The arrangement you've made is generous. My family is grateful." Something flickered across the Duke's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or regret. "Mrs. Ferguson tells me you're to maintain the library. I trust she's explained my system." "Yes, Your Grace. I'll be very careful." "I'm sure you will." He set the Keats volume back on the shelf, his long fingers lingering on the spine. "Miss Hartley, I want to be clear about something. You may have come here as payment for your father's debt, but while you're in my household, you'll be treated with respect. If anyone at all, treats you poorly or makes you uncomfortable, I expect you to report it to Mrs. Ferguson immediately. Is that understood?" Violet blinked, taken aback by the firmness in his voice. Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. And regarding the books, Mrs. Ferguson was right to tell you that you're welcome to read them. I'd rather have them used than gathering dust. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Hartley." "Yes, Your Grace?" "Don't be ashamed of your education. Don't hide your intelligence. Those who look down on you for it aren't worth your concern." His eyes held hers for a moment longer. "Ignorance is nothing to be proud of, and knowledge is nothing to be ashamed of. Remember that." Before Violet could respond, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor. She stood alone in the library, her heart racing, her mind whirling. That had not been what she'd expected. She'd anticipated coldness, perhaps contempt, or at best indifference. She had not expected kindness. She had not expected to be seen, and she certainly had not expected the Duke of Ravencrest to discuss Keats with her as if she were his equal. Dangerous, she thought. This is dangerous. But even as the warning sounded in her mind, she couldn't quite suppress the small flutter of hope in her chest. The days that followed established a routine. Violet rose at 6, breakfasted quickly in the servants' hall, and spent her mornings in the library. She dusted shelves, polished furniture, organized new acquisitions in the catalogue ledger. The work was pleasant, undemanding, and gave her plenty of time to admire the books she tended. The Duke appeared occasionally, always briefly, usually to request a particular volume. He was invariably polite, thanking her for her assistance, never making her feel like a servant despite the clear difference in their stations, but he never lingered to talk as he had that first morning, and Violet told herself she was relieved. She took her meals with the other servants in the large kitchen and gradually began to feel more comfortable with them. Molly was irrepressibly cheerful, full of gossip about the village and the neighbors. Annie was quieter but kind, often saving Violet an extra slice of bread or a particularly good cut of meat, and Mrs. Ferguson watched over them all like a mother hen, strict but loving, quick to scold but equally quick to offer comfort when needed. "You're settling in well, lass," the housekeeper told Violet one afternoon. His Grace remarked on it just this morning, said the library has never been better organized. Violet felt an absurd rush of pleasure at the praise. "I'm glad he's satisfied." "More than satisfied, I'd say." Mrs. Ferguson gave her a knowing look. "He asked me yesterday where you'd come from, what your family was like. I told him you were a merchant's daughter, well-educated, sent here through no fault of your own." "Mrs. Ferguson, you didn't need to—" "Didn't I?" The older woman's expression was gentle but firm. "His Grace is a good man, Miss Hartley, but he's been raised with privilege. Sometimes he needs reminding that circumstances of birth don't determine a person's worth. I thought it wouldn't hurt for him to know your story." Violet wasn't sure how she felt about that. The idea of the Duke discussing her with his housekeeper was both mortifying and oddly touching. "Has he said anything else?" she asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Ferguson's smile turned knowing. "Just that he's pleased to finally have someone in the household who appreciates his library as much as he does. He said, and I quote, 'It's a relief to have the books in the hands of someone who understands their value.'" Violet felt her cheeks warm. "That's kind of him." It is. His Grace has a good heart, though he keeps it well guarded." Mrs. Ferguson paused, then added carefully, "He's been through a difficult time these past few years, lost his father suddenly, inherited the dukedom younger than expected, had to shoulder responsibilities he wasn't quite prepared for. It's made him serious, perhaps too serious. He needs reminding that there's more to life than duty." There was something in the housekeeper's tone that made Violet look up sharply. "Mrs. Ferguson, I'm just saying, lass, that kindness matters, and intelligence, and seeing people for who they truly are, rather than what society says they should be." She patted Violet's hand. "Now, come help me with the linens. Even library maids have to pitch in when there's work to be done." Sunday arrived with clear skies and crisp air. After attending morning service at the village church, where Violet sat with the other servants in the back pews while the Duke occupied his family's prominent box, the afternoon stretched ahead with blessed freedom. "Sundays after 1 o'clock are your own," Mrs. Ferguson had told her. "Most of the staff visit family in the village or rest. You're free to do as you please." Violet wasn't sure what to do with free time. At home, Sundays had meant church, then helping her mother with the washing, playing with Lily, reading together if there was time. Here, she had no responsibilities, no obligations. She decided to explore the grounds. She'd seen the gardens from her window, but hadn't yet walked through them. She was admiring a late-blooming rosebush when she heard voices from beyond the hedge. Male voices, one of them unmistakably the Duke's. "Absolutely magnificent bloodlines," the Duke was saying. Her sire was one of the finest in England, and her dam was impeccable as well. "And the foal." This voice was older, gravelly. "Due in January. I'm hoping for a filly, though I'll be content with whatever arrives healthy." Curious, despite herself, Violet followed the voices and found herself at the edge of a vast paddock. The Duke stood at the fence with an older man in a groom's clothing, both watching a dapple-grey mare grazing peacefully. The mare was beautiful, sleek and elegant, with a slightly rounded belly that indicated her pregnancy. She moved with unhurried grace, occasionally pausing to tear up mouthfuls of grass. "She's lovely," Violet said without thinking. Both men turned. The older man, clearly the head groom, looked surprised. The Duke's expression was harder to read. "Miss Hartley," the Duke said, "I didn't expect to see you out here." "I'm sorry, Your Grace, I didn't mean to intrude. Mrs. Ferguson said I had the afternoon free, so I was just walking. No intrusion. To her surprise, he gestured her forward. Come meet Moonstone. She's one of our finest mares. Violet approached cautiously. The mare raised her head to study this newcomer, ears pricked forward with curiosity rather than alarm. May I? Violet asked, extending her hand. Go ahead. Violet moved slowly, speaking softly as her grandfather had taught her years ago. Hello, beautiful girl. Aren't you magnificent? And carrying a baby, too. That must feel strange, having someone else moving around inside you. The mare lowered her head to sniff Violet's outstretched hand, then allowed her to stroke her velvety nose. She likes you, the Duke observed. The Moonstone is usually wary of strangers. My grandfather worked with horses, Violet explained, still stroking the mare's face. He was head groom at Thornhill Estate in Kent. He used to say that horses can sense your intentions. If you approach with respect and gentility, they'll respond in kind. Thornhill Estate. The Duke's voice sharpened with interest. Your grandfather was Robert Sterling. Violet looked up, surprised. You knew him? I knew of him. Sterling was legendary among horsemen. His methods of gentle training were revolutionary. He proved you could train even the most difficult horses without cruelty. The Duke moved to stand beside her at the fence. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but I've studied his techniques. They've influenced much of how we work with our horses here. Pride swelled in Violet's chest. He would have been honored to know that, Your Grace. He always said that horses deserved the same respect as people, that cruelty diminished the person inflicting it, not just the animal receiving it. A wise man? The Duke was quiet for a moment, watching Moonstone. When did he pass? 5 years ago. I was 14. Violet's throat tightened with old grief. He taught me as much as he could before then, how to read a horse's mood, how to approach them, how to earn their trust. My mother thought it was improper. She wanted me to focus on more ladylike pursuits, but grandfather insisted. He said understanding horses was understanding nature itself, and there was nothing improper about that. He was right. The Duke glanced at her. Would you like to see the stables? We have about 24 horses, some for riding, some for breeding, and one particularly troublesome stallion that I acquired at auction 3 months ago. Violet knew she should refuse. This was too informal, too friendly. She was a servant, and he was a duke, and there should be clear boundaries between them. But the longing to see the horses, to connect with this piece of her grandfather's legacy, was too strong to resist. I would like that very much, Your Grace. The stables were magnificent, easily twice the size of Thornhill's had been, with wide aisles and generous boxes for each horse. Everything was immaculately clean, the brass fittings polished to a high shine, fresh hay in every stall. The Duke led her down the center aisle, pointing out various horses. That's Apollo, my primary riding horse. The bay mare next to him is Diana. The chestnut gelding there is Mercury. They were all beautiful, clearly well cared for and healthy. But when they reached the last stall, set slightly apart from the others, Violet understood why. A black stallion stood at the back of the box, as far from the door as possible. His head was high, ears pinned back, eyes showing white. Every line of his body screamed fear and aggression. This is Midnight, the Duke said quietly. The troublesome one I mentioned. His previous owner claimed he was untrainable, too wild, too vicious to be of any use. But you didn't believe that, Violet said, studying the horse. No, I watched him for nearly an hour before I placed my bid, and what I saw wasn't viciousness. It was fear. The Duke's voice held a note of frustration. He's been mistreated, I'm certain of it, perhaps beaten, perhaps just handled roughly. Whatever happened, he's learned that humans are dangerous. And now he trusts no one. Violet's heart ached for the beautiful, broken creature. Have you tried approaching him? Several times. So have my grooms. He won't let any man near him. Rears, strikes, does everything possible to keep us away. The Duke sighed. I'm beginning to think his previous owner was right. Perhaps he is beyond help. No. The word came out more forcefully than Violet intended. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but I don't believe that. My grandfather used to say that no horse is beyond help if you're willing to be patient enough. Some just need more time than others. Perhaps, the Duke didn't sound convinced, but I can't risk my grooms getting hurt trying to prove that theory. Violet stepped closer to the stall door. Midnight's ears flicked toward her, though he didn't move from his defensive position at the back. He's listening to you, the Duke observed. He's wondering if I'm a threat, Violet corrected. She began speaking to the horse in the same low, soothing tone she'd used with Moonstone. "Hello, handsome. I know you're frightened. I know you've been hurt. But I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to stand here and talk to you for a bit, all right? You don't have to come closer if you don't want to. I'll just be here." She kept talking, about nothing in particular, just letting Midnight get used to her voice. The Duke stood silently beside her, watching. After perhaps 10 minutes, Midnight's ears slowly came forward. His posture relaxed slightly. He took one cautious step toward the front of the stall, then stopped. "Good boy," Violet murmured. "That's very brave. You're doing wonderfully. Remarkable," the Duke said softly. "Count in 3 months. That's the closest he's come to the door when anyone's been present. He's testing to see if I mean what I say," Violet explained. "Whether I'll stay calm or suddenly do something frightening. My grandfather said the first step in training a fearful horse is simply being boringly consistent. No sudden movements, no raised voices, just quiet presence. Your grandfather was clearly a master of his craft." The Duke paused. "Miss Hartley, I have an unusual request. Would you be willing to work with Midnight, perhaps on Sunday afternoons, when you have free time? I'd compensate you additionally, of course." "No," Violet interrupted, then blushed at her own boldness. "I mean, I'd be happy to help, Your Grace, but I don't need additional compensation. If I can help this horse, that would be payment enough." The Duke studied her with that intense focus she was beginning to recognize. "Nucky, why?" "Because," Violet struggled to put it into words, "because my grandfather spent his life proving that kindness is more effective than cruelty. Because every time someone writes off an animal as hopeless, it diminishes us all. And because," she looked at Midnight, still standing warily in his stall, "because I know what it's like to be powerless and afraid, to be at someone else's mercy, hoping they'll be kind. If I can give this horse a reason to trust again, then perhaps there's hope for all of us." The words hung in the air between them. Violet realized belatedly how much she'd revealed, not just about Midnight, but about herself. "Yes," the Duke said finally, his voice rough. "Yes, I understand that better than you might think." He cleared his throat. "Sunday afternoons, then. I'll tell the grooms that you have permission to work with Midnight. Though I'd like to be present, if you don't object, to ensure your safety." "I don't object, Your Grace." As they walked back toward the house in the golden afternoon light, Violet felt something shifting inside her, some careful wall she'd built beginning to crack. This man, this Duke she'd expected to be distant and cold, kept surprising her with his gentleness, his genuine interest, his willingness to see beyond the surface. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't seem to make herself care. The following Sunday, Violet returned to the stables. The Duke was already there, leaning against the stable wall in casual clothing that made him look younger, more approachable. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I gave my word, Your Grace." "So you did." He gestured toward Midnight's stall. "Shall we?" They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Every Sunday afternoon, Violet would spend an hour with Midnight, talking to him, gradually moving closer, eventually offering treats from her outstretched hand. The Duke was always present, watching, occasionally asking questions about her methods. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the nature of their conversations shifted. They talked about horses, yes, but also about books, about the poetry they both loved, about the Duke's time at Oxford and Violet's childhood in Kent, about his father's sudden death and the weight of unexpected responsibility, about her family's fall from comfortable prosperity to desperate poverty. "It happened so quickly," Violet said one afternoon, stroking Midnight's neck while the horse finally allowed her touch. "One day we had everything we needed. The next, my father was staring at ashes and realizing he'd lost everything. The fabric, the warehouse, even the building itself, all gone. And the insurance? Paid out, but not nearly enough to cover his debts. He'd borrowed to expand the business, you see, and then..." She swallowed hard. "And then you were kind enough to offer this arrangement, which saved us from complete ruin." "Kindness had nothing to do with it," the Duke said quietly. "Your father's debt was legitimate. This arrangement benefits me as much as him. I needed someone to maintain my library, and I got someone far more qualified than I had any right to expect." "You're generous to say so, Your Grace." "Nicholas," Violet's hands stilled on Midnight's neck. "I beg your pardon. My name is Nicholas, and when we're here, just the two of us..." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. I'd like you to use it, if you're comfortable doing so. This was dangerous. This was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, but Violet found herself saying, "All right, Nicholas." The sound of his name in her voice did something to his expression, softened it, opened it. "Thank you." They stood there in the quiet stable, midnight breathing softly between them, and Violet felt the world shifting beneath her feet. She was falling. She knew she was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. 6 weeks after Violet's arrival at Ravencrest, Moonstone gave birth to her foal on a cold January night. The Duke sent for Violet despite the late hour, nearly midnight, and she came down to the stables in her nightgown and shawl, her hair loose down her back. "I thought you'd want to see," Nicholas said when she arrived breathless and concerned. "Given your grandfather's legacy." In the foaling stall, Moonstone stood with her newborn, a filly dappled like her mother, already trying to stand on impossibly long, wobbly legs. "Oh," Violet breathed. "She's perfect." "She is," Nicholas agreed. His face was alight with joy, years seeming to fall away from him. Absolutely perfect. They stood together, watching the filly finally manage to stand, then wobble over to nurse. Moonstone nickered softly, encouraging her baby with gentle nudges. "What will you name her?" Violet asked. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I thought perhaps Violet Star, if you'd permit it." Violet's heart stopped. "You want to name her after me? She represents new beginnings, hope, something beautiful emerging from difficulty." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. "Like you, Nicholas, I shouldn't have said that," he said quickly. "Forgive me. It was inappropriate." "No," Violet whispered. "It wasn't. It was lovely. Thank you." They stood in the warm stable, the newborn filly nursing peacefully, and Violet knew with absolute certainty that she was in love with Nicholas Ravenscroft, and from the way he was looking at her, tender and longing and full of regret, she thought he might be falling too, which made what came next so much worse. Because 3 days later, a letter arrived from London that would change everything. The letter arrived on a grey January morning, delivered by a private courier from London. Violet was in the library, cataloguing a new shipment of books that had arrived from a dealer in Edinburgh, when she heard raised voices from the Duke's study across the hall. She tried not to listen. It was none of her business, but the walls were thin and sound carried. "Must come to London immediately." A man's voice, unfamiliar and imperious. "I have responsibilities here." Nicholas's voice, tight with barely controlled frustration. "I cannot simply abandon the estate. The estate will survive your absence for a fortnight. Your betrothed, however, will not be so forgiving." The word hit Violet like a physical blow. Betrothed. She stood frozen, the book in her hands forgotten, as the full weight of that single word crashed over her. Of course Nicholas was betrothed. He was a duke, wealthy and titled and eligible. Naturally there would be an understanding, an arrangement, a woman waiting for him in London. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have let herself imagine, even for a moment, that what they'd shared in the stables, those conversations, those looks, that moment when he'd named the filly after her, how could she have thought any of it meant what her foolish heart had wanted it to mean? The study door opened, and a man emerged, tall, silver-haired, dressed in expensive London tailoring. He looked like what he was: aristocracy, privilege, the embodiment of a world Violet would never belong to. He glanced at Violet with the sort of dismissive assessment one gives to furniture, then continued down the hall without acknowledgement. A moment later, Nicholas appeared in the doorway of his study. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and when his eyes found Violet, something in his expression cracked. "Miss Hartley, Your Grace." Violet's voice came out steady, which was a miracle considering her hands were shaking. She set down the book with careful precision. "I should let you attend to your business. Please excuse me." "Violet, wait." But she was already moving, walking quickly toward the servants' stairs, needing to get away before he saw the tears threatening to spill over. She made it to her small room, closed the door, and pressed her back against it, breathing hard. Stupid. So stupid. Of course he was engaged. Men like Nicholas Ravenscroft didn't marry women like Violet Hartley. Servants who came to work off their fathers, debts, women with no fortune, no connections, no place in his world. She'd let herself forget that, let herself hope, let herself imagine a future that was never possible. The tears came then, hot and angry and bitter. She cried silently into her pillow, mourning not just what she'd lost because she'd never truly had it, but what she'd been foolish enough to imagine. A knock on her door startled her. She wiped hastily at her face, trying to compose herself. "Yes, it's me, lass." Mrs. Ferguson's gentle burr. "May I come in?" Violet opened the door. The housekeeper took one look at her tear-stained face and made a soft sound of sympathy. "Ah, dearie, you heard about Lady Penelope, then?" "Lady Penelope," Violet repeated numbly. "Lady Penelope Danbury, daughter of Lord Edmund Danbury, one of the wealthiest peers in England. She and his Grace have been informally promised since last summer." Mrs. Ferguson came in and closed the door behind her. "They're not formally engaged yet, but everyone expects an announcement soon." "I see." Violet's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Do you, lass?" Mrs. Ferguson's eyes were kind, but knowing. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've developed feelings for his Grace. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm rarely mistaken about these things, he's developed feelings for you as well." "That's not... we haven't... It's not like that," Violet protested weakly. "Isn't it?" The housekeeper sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "I've seen how he looks at you, how he arranges to be in the library when you're there, how he lights up when talking about your work with that troubled stallion, and I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching." Violet felt heat flood her face. "It doesn't matter. He's engaged, or will be, to Lady Penelope, a woman of his own class, as it should be." "Should it?" Mrs. Ferguson's tone was thoughtful. "I wonder. I've met Lady Penelope twice now. She's visited Ravencrest before. Beautiful girl, I'll grant you. Impeccably bred, perfect manners, everything a duchess should be on paper. But she has ice in her veins. That one. Looks down on anyone she considers beneath her, which is most of the world, and she has no love for Ravencrest. Complained the entire time she was here about how provincial it was, how far from London, how tedious country life is." Mrs. Ferguson shook her head. "She'll make his Grace miserable. Mark my words. But duty is duty, and family expectations are family expectations. So he'll marry her, and they'll both be wretched, and there's nothing to be done about it." The bleakness in the housekeeper's voice matched the despair in Violet's heart. "Then I should leave," Violet said quietly. "As soon as possible. I can't stay here and watch. You signed a contract for 2 years, lass, and your family needs the money from your service. Can you really afford to leave?" No, she couldn't. Violet closed her eyes against fresh tears. She was trapped by debt, by duty, by circumstances beyond her control, just like Nicholas was trapped by his title and his family's expectations. "I'll manage," she whispered. "I'll have to." Mrs. Ferguson squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. You're a good lass, and you deserve better than this." After the housekeeper left, Violet sat on her bed and stared at the wall, feeling the weight of her situation settle over her like a suffocating blanket. She would stay. She would fulfill her contract. She would do her work, maintain her dignity, and keep her breaking heart carefully hidden. And she would watch Nicholas Ravenscroft marry Lady Penelope Danbury, and somehow find a way to survive it. Nicholas left for London the next morning. Violet watched from her window as his carriage pulled away, disappearing down the long drive lined with bare winter trees. She told herself the ache in her chest was nothing, meant nothing, would pass with time. She was lying. The days that followed were long and hollow. Violet threw herself into her work with almost desperate energy, reorganizing sections of the library that didn't need reorganizing, polishing furniture until it gleamed, cataloging and recataloguing the same volumes, anything to keep busy, anything to not think. Mrs. Ferguson watched her with worried eyes but said nothing. Molly tried to cheer her with gossip and jokes that Violet couldn't quite bring herself to laugh at. Even Annie noticed something was wrong, though she was too tactful to mention it. Sunday came, and Violet went to the stables as usual to work with Midnight. But without Nicholas there, it felt wrong, empty. The stallion had made remarkable progress. He now allowed Violet to touch him freely, even taking treats from her hand, but the joy had gone out of it. She stayed only half an hour before returning to the house, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner of the stable. A week passed, then another. Letters arrived for Mrs. Ferguson with instructions from London. His Grace would return in 10 days, and he would be bringing guests. The house must be prepared. Lady Penelope and her parents, Mrs. Ferguson told the assembled staff grimly, they'll stay a week, maybe longer. Everything must be perfect, and I mean perfect. Lady Danbury finds fault with everything. and her husband is nearly as bad. We'll need every room spotless, meals worthy of royalty, and not a hair out of place on any of our heads." "Understood." A chorus of "Yes, Mrs. Ferguson" rippled through the kitchen. The housekeeper's eyes found Violet's. There was sympathy there, and warning. "This will be hard. Be ready." Violet nodded. She would be ready. She would have to be. The preparation consumed the next 10 days. Every room was scrubbed, every surface polished, every piece of silver buffed until it could serve as a mirror. Fresh linens were hung in the guest chambers, the finest available, with monogrammed pillowcases and embroidered coverlets. The formal dining room was prepared for use, the table set with china so delicate Violet was afraid to breathe near it. Molly and Annie worked from dawn until late into the night, preparing elaborate dishes under Mrs. Ferguson's exacting supervision. Game birds hung in the larder, delicate pastries filled the shelves, wine from the best vintages was brought up from the cellar. "Lord Danbury fancies himself a connoisseur," Mrs. Ferguson explained. "He'll judge us by the quality of the wine as much as anything else." Violet found herself in charge of selecting which vintages to serve with which courses. Nicholas had left detailed notes about the cellar, and she'd studied them carefully during her time maintaining the library. It was one more thread of connection to him, and she clung to it even though it hurt. Finally, the day of arrival came. The staff assembled in their best uniforms, Violet in a new black dress Mrs. Ferguson had commissioned for her, her hair pinned so severely it made her scalp ache. They stood in a line in the entrance hall, waiting, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Violet's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The front door opened. Nicholas entered first, and Violet's breath caught despite her best efforts to remain unmoved. He looked different, older, somehow, more reserved. His face was carefully blank, his posture stiff, and when his eyes swept over the assembled servants, they passed over Violet without pausing. It shouldn't have hurt. She had no right to expect anything else. It hurt anyway. Behind him came the Danburys. Lord Edmund Danbury was a large man, not fat precisely, but substantial, with a florid face, elaborate whiskers, and an air of self-importance that preceded him like a physical presence. He boomed greetings as if addressing a crowd rather than a handful of servants, his voice too loud in the marble hall. Lady Constance Danbury was his opposite, thin to the point of frailty, with sharp features and eyes that catalogued every detail with obvious displeasure. She was literally draped in jewelry, rings on every finger, bracelets stacked on both wrists, a heavy necklace that must have weighed pounds, earrings that glittered with what might have been diamonds. And between them, like a jewel in a setting, was Lady Penelope Danbury. She was beautiful. Violet had known she would be, but knowing and seeing were different things. Penelope was perhaps 23, with pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls beneath a fashionable bonnet, porcelain skin that had never seen a day of manual labor, and features so perfectly symmetrical they seemed almost unreal. Her traveling dress was the height of London fashion, deep blue silk that probably cost more than Violet's father had earned in a year. She was everything Violet was not, everything she could never be. "Nicholas, darling," Penelope said, her voice high and carrying. She placed a possessive hand on his arm. "Finally, I thought we'd never arrive. This dreadful journey, I vow I'm bruised from head to toe from that awful road." "The Peak District roads are not London streets," Nicholas said mildly, "but we do our best to maintain them." "Well, your best is clearly insufficient," Penelope laughed, as if this were charming rather than insulting. "We simply must do something about that once we're married. I cannot be expected to travel back and forth on such primitive roads." Lady Constance was surveying the entrance hall with the air of someone looking for dust. "The house is adequate, I suppose. Rather old-fashioned, but that's to be expected in the provinces." "Nonsense, my dear," Lord Edmund boomed. "It's a fine house indeed, though I dare say it could use modernization. New wing, perhaps. Proper entertaining spaces. Can't have my daughter living in a medieval fortress." "What?" Nicholas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ravencrest Hall was built in 1650, hardly medieval, and it's been in my family for—" Yes, family history. Very important," Lord Edmund interrupted with a dismissive wave. "But we're talking about the future now, my boy. The future." Mrs. Ferguson stepped forward smoothly. "Your rooms are prepared, my lord, my lady. Perhaps you'd like to rest after your journey. Dinner will be served at 8. "Yes, rest would be welcome," Lady Constance said. She looked at the assembled servants as if seeing them for the first time. Her gaze lingered on Violet, eyes narrowing slightly. "Who is this? I don't recall seeing her on our last visit." "Miss Hartley, my lady," Mrs. Ferguson answered. "She maintains His Grace's library and assists with household accounts." "A lady's companion of sorts." Lady Constance's tone suggested this was somehow suspicious. "How modern. I trust she knows her place." "Of course, my lady." Mrs. Ferguson's voice was perfectly deferential, but Violet heard the steel underneath. Penelope's gaze swept over Violet dismissively, barely registering her presence before moving on to more interesting things. "Nicholas, you must show me the gardens tomorrow. I remember they were quite charming, despite the provincial surroundings." "Of course," Nicholas said. His voice was carefully neutral, his expression unreadable. But for just a moment, so brief, Violet almost thought she'd imagined it. His eyes found hers, and in that glance, she saw such anguish, such apology, such desperate regret that it took her breath away. Then it was gone. He was escorting Lady Penelope up the stairs, Lord Edmund booming commentary about architecture, Lady Constance making pointed observations about the age of the furniture. The servants were dismissed. Violet fled to the kitchen, needing air, needing space, needing anything but this crushing weight on her chest. "Breathe, lass," Mrs. Ferguson said softly, appearing at her elbow. "Just breathe. You're stronger than this." But Violet wasn't sure she was. Because seeing Nicholas with Penelope, seeing the reality of his future, the woman he would marry, the life he would lead that had no place for Violet in it, was so much worse than imagining it had been, and the week ahead stretched before her like a prison sentence. Dinner that first night was an ordeal Violet had not been prepared for. She was assigned to serve, to move silently through the dining room, placing and removing courses, pouring wine, being seen but not heard. Being invisible, the formal dining room had been transformed. Dozens of candles in crystal candelabras cast golden light over the table, set with the finest china and crystal. Flowers from the hothouse, roses in January, a fortune in themselves, adorned the center. Everything gleamed. Violet entered through the servant's door carrying the soup course, her hands steady through sheer force of will. The conversation was already underway. "Simply cannot understand why you insist on remaining here so much of the year," Penelope was saying, her voice pitched to carry. "London is where everything important happens. Politics, society, culture. Derbyshire is so remote." "Remote is rather the point," Nicholas said mildly. "This is a working estate. The horses require daily attention. The tenants need management. The land—" "Nicholas," Penelope's voice took on a sharp edge. "We've discussed this. Once we're married, we'll maintain a residence here for appearances, of course, but our primary home will be in London. That's simply how it's done. Actually, Ravencrest Hall has been the primary seat of my family for—" "Oh, tradition." Penelope waved a dismissive hand. "Tradition is all very well, but one must adapt to modern life, and modern life is in London." Violet moved silently around the table, ladling soup, her presence completely unnoticed by the diners. She might as well have been a ghost. "The season begins in April," Lady Constance added. "You'll need to be in London by then at the latest. Ravencrest. A new duke is quite the prize. You'll be invited everywhere, and Penelope will need your escort." "Of course," Nicholas said. There was something flat in his voice, defeated. Lord Edmund cleared his throat. "Now then, about the wedding itself. We've been thinking June. That gives sufficient time for proper preparation. The ceremony at St. George's in Hanover Square, naturally. Reception at Danbury House. We can accommodate 500 easily." 500? Nicholas sounded faint. "At minimum. Can't slight anyone important. Bad form." Lord Edmund drained his wineglass, and Violet moved forward to refill it. He didn't glance at her. "And there's the matter of settlements to be finalized. My solicitor has drawn up papers. Very generous on our part, I might add. I'm sure we can discuss the details at a more appropriate time," Nicholas said. "No time like the present," Lord Edmund boomed. "Besides, we're all family here, practically speaking. Might as well be frank about money matters." "How refreshing," Nicholas murmured. The soup course was cleared. Violet returned with the fish, delicate sole in butter sauce, one of Molly's specialties. She served it mechanically, her mind carefully blank, refusing to process the conversation happening around her. "And children, of course," Lady Constance said. "We'll expect an heir within the first year, preferably 2 children in quick succession to secure the succession. Violet's hands trembled slightly as she set down a plate. She steadied them through force of will. "Mother, please," Penelope said, but she was laughing. "You're embarrassing poor Nicholas." "Nonsense. These matters must be discussed. A duke needs heirs. It's his duty." "Speaking of duty," Lord Edmund said, "there's the matter of Penelope's pin money. She's accustomed to a certain standard." "Father," Penelope interrupted, her voice sharp. "Not now." An uncomfortable silence fell. Violet served the last plate and retreated to the servant's door, waiting for the next course. From her position in the shadows, she could see Nicholas's face. He sat rigidly, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his plate. He looked like a man being measured for his own coffin, and Penelope, beside him, looked triumphant, possessive, like a cat that had caught a particularly valuable mouse. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of courses and conversation, talk of London society, of people Violet didn't know, of a world she would never inhabit. She moved through it mechanically, serving and clearing, pouring and refilling, being nothing, being no one. Finally, mercifully, it ended. The Danburys retired to the drawing room for port and cards. Nicholas excused himself, claiming estate business that needed attention. Violet helped clear the dining room, her movements automatic. Mrs. Ferguson sent her back to the kitchen with the last load of dishes. She was halfway down the servants' corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. "Miss Hartley." She froze, turned. Nicholas stood in the shadowy hallway, his face haggard in the dim light. "Your Grace, did you need something?" "I need—" He stopped, started again. "I need you to know that none of this is what I wanted. Your Grace, it's not my place." "Stop." His voice was rough. "Stop calling me that. Stop being so damnably proper. I know what you must think of me. I know how this looks. But I need you to understand this arrangement with Lady Penelope was made years ago, long before you came here. Before I knew—" He broke off. "Before you knew what?" The words came out sharper than Violet intended. "Before I knew there could be anything different, anything better." He took a step toward her, then seemed to catch himself. "I'm trapped, Violet. By duty, by family expectations, by promises made when I was too young to understand what I was agreeing to. And I'm trapped by my father's debts," Violet said quietly. "We're both trapped, Your Grace. In different cages, perhaps, but trapped nonetheless, and there's no point in pretending otherwise. Violet, please." She held up a hand. "Please don't say anything more. This is already unbearable. Don't make it worse." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the shadowy corridor. When she reached the safety of the kitchen, she set down the dishes with trembling hands and allowed herself one moment, just one, of complete despair. Then she straightened her spine, dried her eyes, and went back to work, because that's what servants did. They endured. The week that followed was a special kind of torture. Lady Penelope was everywhere, a constant, inescapable presence in blue silk and blonde curls, and that high, carrying laugh. She clung to Nicholas's arm as he showed her the gardens. She insisted on accompanying him on his morning rides, despite clearly being an indifferent horsewoman. She monopolized his time at every meal, every evening, every waking moment, and she complained about everything. The country air was too cold and dried her skin. The lack of society was stifling. The servants weren't properly trained. She'd caught one of them, Annie looking at her directly, which was impertinent. The food was too rustic. The library was musty. The horses smelled. The village was depressing. Derbyshire was hopeless. Violet heard all of it, sometimes from the woman herself, sometimes from Molly, who'd been within earshot, sometimes through the thin walls as Penelope held forth in the drawing room. "I simply cannot fathom," Penelope declared one afternoon when Violet was dusting in the adjacent library, "why you insist on personally managing everything here, Nicholas. You have stewards, you have managers. Why dirty your hands with such tedious details?" "Because this is my home." Nicholas's voice was patient but strained. "These are my tenants, my lands, my responsibility." "Oh, responsibility." Penelope made it sound like a distasteful word. "You take everything so seriously, darling. It's quite exhausting. Once we're married, we really must work on making you more social. You're far too serious." "Perhaps I prefer serious to frivolous." A pause. Then Penelope's laugh, sharp as breaking glass. "Was that an insult, Nicholas? How droll. But really, you must understand, I can't be expected to rusticate here year-round like some farmer's wife. London is where we belong, where I belong. Surely you see that. I see that you have no love for Ravencrest, Nicholas said quietly. You've made that abundantly clear. Love? For a house? Nicholas? Don't be absurd. Houses are assets, nothing more. What matters is position, status, being seen in the right places by the right people. Her voice softened, became cajoling. Come now, don't sulk. Once you're back in London properly, you'll remember how much you enjoy it. The clubs, the entertainments, the political discussions. Derbyshire will seem like a bad dream. Violet's hands stilled on the bookshelf. There was a long silence from the drawing room. Finally, Nicholas spoke, his voice very quiet. Ravencrest is not a bad dream, it's my life. Everything I care about is here. Well, you'll simply have to learn to care about different things, Penelope said briskly. Now, come. We're expected at the Caldwells for dinner, and I must decide what to wear. Footsteps. The drawing room door opening and closing. Silence. Violet sagged against the bookshelf, her heart aching for Nicholas, trapped in a future that would make him miserable, unable to see any way out. The breaking point came 4 days into the Danburys' visit. Dinner had been even more strained than usual. Lady Constance had criticized the wine selection, the arrangement of the flowers, and the temperature of the soup. Lord Edmund had expounded at length about his political connections and hinted heavily that Nicholas should take a seat in Parliament, now that you're to be properly married and settled. And Penelope had unveiled her master plan. I've been thinking, she announced over the fish course, her voice bright, about after the wedding. And I've decided that 6 months of the year in London simply isn't sufficient. We should really aim for 8 months, April through November. That would give us the entire season, the summer soirees, the autumn hunting season. We could come here for Christmas, perhaps, if the weather isn't too dreadful, and maybe a month in summer, though August in the country is so deadly dull. Nicholas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. 8 months in London? Yes. Doesn't that sound perfect? Penelope beamed. Oh, and I've spoken with Mother. We've decided that the east wing of Danbury House should be redecorated for us. The current style is so outdated. I'm thinking French Empire, with blue silk wall coverings and gilt furniture. Very elegant. Penelope, Nicholas said carefully, I cannot abandon Ravencrest for 8 months of the year. The estate requires... Oh, for heaven's sake. Penelope's smile vanished, replaced by irritation. You have stewards. You have managers. You have an entire staff of servants to handle such things. That's what they're for. The breeding program requires my personal... The horses. Penelope's voice rose. You're choosing horses over your future wife, over your position in society, over everything that matters. The horses are what matter, Nicholas said, his own voice rising slightly. This estate is what matters. The tenants, the land, the traditions that have been maintained for generations. That's what matters, not London parties and gilt furniture. Nicholas, Lady Constance gasped, surely you don't mean to insult our daughter. I'm not insulting anyone. I'm simply stating facts. Ravencrest is not a hobby I can set aside whenever convenient. It's my life's work, my heritage, and I will not abandon it to play society gentleman in London. Lord Edmund's face had gone red. Now see here, Ravenscroft. No, you see here. Nicholas stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I have been patient. I have been accommodating. I have listened to weeks of complaints about my home, my land, my life, but there are limits to what I will tolerate. Nicholas, sit down, Penelope hissed. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene, Nicholas laughed, a harsh sound. You've spent 4 days making it abundantly clear that everything about my life disgusts you. The house is too old. The countryside is too remote. The horses are beneath your notice. Tell me, Penelope, what exactly do you like about me? Beyond the title and the fortune. The silence that fell was absolute. Penelope's face had gone pale, then red. How dare you, she whispered. How dare you speak to me this way, in front of my parents? I dare because I'm tired of pretending. Nicholas's voice was low but carried clearly through the room. Tired of pretending this arrangement will work. Tired of pretending we have anything in common beyond a contract negotiated by our fathers. Tired of... He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he'd gone too far. Lady Constance stood, trembling with outrage. Lord Danbury, I believe we should retire. Ravencrest clearly needs time to reconsider his unfortunate outburst. Indeed, Lord Danbury said coldly. Very unfortunate. Very unfortunate indeed. They swept from the room, Penelope between them, her head held high, but her face tight with fury. Nicholas remained standing at the table, breathing hard, his hands braced against the wood. Violet, who had been frozen by the servants' door throughout the entire exchange, finally moved. She began clearing plates with hands that shook slightly. "Leave it," Nicholas said without looking at her. "Please, just leave it." She hesitated, then set down the plates and retreated quickly. In the kitchen, Mrs. Ferguson and the other servants were buzzing with barely suppressed excitement. "Did you hear?" Molly whispered. His Grace finally spoke his mind. "Oh, I wish I could have seen Lady Penelope's face." "Hush," Mrs. Ferguson said sharply. "This isn't entertainment. This is disaster. Lord Danbury has powerful connections. If he takes offence, then he takes offence," Annie said unexpectedly. "His Grace deserves better than that harpy anyway." "Annie!" But Mrs. Ferguson didn't sound entirely disapproving. Violet said nothing. She finished helping with the dishes in silence, then excused herself to her room. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the house settle around her, wondering what the morning would bring. Nothing good, she suspected. She was right. The Danburys left the next morning in a flurry of hastily packed trunks and barely concealed fury. Violet watched from her window as the servants loaded luggage onto the carriages. Lady Constance stood ramrod straight, her face like stone. Lord Danbury was red-faced and blustering, clearly delivering some sort of ultimatum to Nicholas on the front steps, and Penelope stood apart, her arms crossed, her beautiful face twisted into something cold and hard. Violet couldn't hear the words, but she saw Penelope step forward, saw her say something directly to Nicholas, saw him shake his head, saw her face flush with anger. Then she was climbing into the carriage, and the Danburys were departing in a cloud of dust and offended dignity. Nicholas remained standing on the front steps long after the carriages disappeared from view. Finally, he turned and walked, not back into the house but toward the stables. Violet knew she shouldn't follow, knew she should maintain proper distance, proper boundaries. She followed anyway. She found him in Midnight's stall, sitting in the hay with his back against the wall. The stallion stood quietly nearby, no longer fearful, just companionable. "You trained him well," Nicholas said without looking up. "He's a different horse now." "We trained him together," Violet corrected quietly. She hesitated at the stall door. "May I?" He gestured for her to enter. She settled into the hay across from him, maintaining careful distance. For a long moment, they sat in silence, with only Midnight's soft breathing filling the space between them. "They'll be back," Nicholas said finally. "Or rather, Lord Danbury will send letters, demands, ultimatums. The engagement isn't formally broken. I didn't quite manage that. Penelope gave me 1 month to come to my senses and present myself in London with proper apologies. Will you go?" "I don't know." He looked at her finally, and his eyes were full of anguish. "I should. It's what's expected, what duty demands. But I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't marry her, Violet. I can't spend my life with someone who despises everything I love, who sees my home as an inconvenience, my work as a hobby, my entire existence as something to be tolerated at best." "Then don't," Violet whispered. "It's not that simple. There are contracts, expectations, family honor. If I break the engagement formally, it will be scandal. Lord Danbury will make my life difficult. He has connections in Parliament, influence in circles I'll need. And my mother," he rubbed his face tiredly. "My mother has been urging this match for years. She thinks Penelope is perfect." "Is she perfect?" "On paper, yes. Beautiful, well-bred, connected to all the right families. Everything a duchess should be." Nicholas's voice was hollow. "Everything except happy to be one." Violet wanted to touch him, wanted to take his hand, offer comfort, didn't dare. "What do you want?" she asked instead. "Not what's expected, not what duty demands. What do you actually want?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I want to wake up in the morning and not dread the day ahead. I want conversations that matter about things I care about. I want someone who sees Ravencrest as a home, not a prison. I want—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I want what I can't have," he finished quietly. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Violet knew she should change the subject, retreat to safer ground. "Sometimes," she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper, What we think we can't have is simply what we haven't had the courage to reach for. Nicholas stared at her. Violet. The stable door crashed open. They sprang apart. Not that they'd been touching, but the guilty movement was instinctive. Mrs. Ferguson stood in the doorway, her face grave. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but Lord Ashworth has arrived from London. He says it's urgent. Nicholas closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. Thank you, Mrs. Ferguson. Tell him I'll be there momentarily. The housekeeper left, but not before giving Violet a look that was equal parts sympathy and warning. When they were alone again, Nicholas looked at Violet with such longing it made her chest ache. This isn't over, he said quietly. One way or another, I'm going to find a way out of this engagement. And then, don't, Violet interrupted. Don't say anything more, not until you're truly free, not until it's real. But, please, Nicholas, her voice broke on his name. I can't bear it if you make promises you can't keep. I can't survive that. He nodded slowly, understanding. Then he stood, brushed hay from his clothes, and left. Violet remained in the stall with Midnight, letting silent tears fall into the stallion's dark mane. She'd been foolish to hope. Foolish to imagine that love could bridge the unbridgeable gap between their worlds. But even knowing it was foolish, she couldn't seem to make herself stop hoping. Lord Ashworth was waiting in the library. A deliberate choice, Violet suspected, as it was Nicholas's favourite room in the house. She was dusting shelves in the far corner when Nicholas entered, still in his dusty riding clothes, hay clinging to his coat. Lord Ashworth stood by the window, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and an air of casual authority that came from decades of privilege. Nicholas. Lord Ashworth's voice was warm, but concerned. You look like hell. I feel like hell, Nicholas said bluntly. What brings you to Ravencrest, Godfather? I assume this isn't a social call. Hardly. I came from London as soon as I heard. Lord Ashworth poured 2 glasses of brandy from the decanter on the side table. The Danburys have been spreading their version of events rather liberally. According to Lady Constance, you've had some sort of breakdown. Lord Edmund claims you insulted his daughter grievously, and Lady Penelope. He paused delicately. Lady Penelope is telling anyone who will listen that you've been bewitched by a servant girl. Violet's hands froze on the bookshelf. She should leave, should make her presence known and excuse herself, but she remained motionless, barely breathing, hoping they hadn't noticed her in the shadowy corner. A servant girl, Nicholas repeated flatly. The story changes depending on who's telling it. Some say she's a scheming fortune hunter. Others claim she's some sort of rural enchantress. Lord Pemberton, you know how he loves drama, suggested she might be French. Despite everything, Nicholas laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. French. Good God. The point is, Lord Ashworth continued, his voice becoming more serious, there's talk, speculation, and the longer you delay going to London to smooth things over with the Danburys, the worse it becomes. I'm not going to London. Nicholas, I mean it. Nicholas took the brandy glass but didn't drink. I cannot marry Penelope Danbury. I won't marry her. The arrangement was a mistake from the beginning, and continuing with it would be a greater mistake still. Lord Ashworth was quiet for a long moment, because of the servant girl, because of 1,000 reasons, because Penelope despises everything about my life here, because she has no interest in being a true partner, only in the title and fortune, because I've spent weeks watching her look down on my home, my staff, my work, everything that matters to me. Nicholas set down his glass untouched. And yes, partially because I've discovered what it feels like to be truly understood by someone, to have conversations that matter, to be seen as something more than a title and an estate. This girl, Lord Ashworth said carefully, tell me about her. Violet's heart hammered so hard she was certain they must hear it. Nicholas was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, her name is Violet Hartley. Her father was William Hartley, a fabric merchant in Kent, whose business was destroyed by fire. He borrowed money from me to try to rebuild. When he couldn't repay the debt, we made an arrangement. His daughter would serve here for 2 years as payment. Good God, Nicholas, that's practically... I know how it sounds. Nicholas's voice was sharp. But she's not a servant in the usual sense. She maintains my library. She's educated. Her mother taught her. She reads poetry and understands it, truly understands it. She worked with horses under her grandfather, Robert Sterling of Thornhill Estate. Do you know that name? Every horseman in England knows that name, Lord Ashworth said quietly. Sterling was a master. She has his gift, She's rehabilitated a stallion that 3 grooms had given up on as hopeless. She discusses literature as an equal. She sees through pretense to truth. Nicholas's voice softened, and when I'm with her, I feel like myself. Not the Duke of Ravencrest, not the keeper of family traditions, just myself. Another long silence. You love her, Lord Ashworth said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. The single word hung in the air, simple and devastating. And she loves you. I don't know. Perhaps. But even if she does, what does it matter? She's the daughter of a bankrupt merchant. She came here as payment for her father's debts. Society will never accept her. My mother will be horrified. The scandal will be enormous. Yes, Lord Ashworth agreed. It will be. Violet waited for him to say more, to list all the reasons why Nicholas should forget her, marry Penelope, do his duty. Instead, Lord Ashworth said, "Tell me something, Nicholas. When your father was dying, what did he say to you?" Nicholas's voice was rough. He said that duty was important, but it wasn't everything. That a life lived entirely for others was no life at all. And that he'd loved my mother desperately. That their marriage had been the greatest joy of his life, that he hoped I would find the same. Your mother, Lord Ashworth said thoughtfully, married your father despite significant opposition from her own family. Did you know that? What? It's true. The Seymours considered the Ravenscrofts beneath them at the time. Old title, but diminished fortune. Your father was rebuilding the estate after his own father's mismanagement. Your mother's family wanted her to marry the Earl of Westbrook, richer, more prestigious, better connected. Lord Ashworth smiled. She told them all to go to hell and married your father anyway. Best decision she ever made. She said so herself. Nicholas stared at him. I never knew that. She doesn't speak of it. Ancient history now. But the point is, Nicholas, your mother understands defying expectations for love better than you might think. That doesn't mean she'll accept Violet. Perhaps not immediately, but she might. In time. Lord Ashworth moved to refill his glass. The question you need to answer is this. Are you willing to face scandal, social ostracism, closed doors and cut connections? Because that's what will happen, at least initially. I know. And are you willing to risk that Miss Hartley herself might not want this? That she might prefer to return to her family, make a match within her own station, live a life without the burden of being a duchess? Nicholas flinched as if struck. I hadn't thought. Of course she might not want. Then you'd better find out, Lord Ashworth said bluntly. Before you burn down your life for a dream that might be one-sided. After Lord Ashworth left, having promised to manage the situation in London as much as possible, Nicholas stood alone in the library. You can come out now, Miss Hartley, he said quietly. I know you're there. Violet emerged from behind the bookshelf, her face burning. I'm sorry. I should have made my presence known. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Didn't you? He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Or did you stay precisely because you wanted to hear what I would say? She couldn't lie. Yes, I wanted to hear. And now that you have, Violet's throat was tight. Now I'm terrified. Of what? Of hoping, of believing this could be real, of letting myself imagine a future that seems impossible. She took a shaky breath. You're a duke, Nicholas. I'm the daughter of a bankrupt merchant. I came here as payment for my father's debts. Society will crucify us both. I don't care about society. You should. Violet's voice was fierce now. Your reputation, your connections, your position, they matter, not just for you but for everyone who depends on you, your tenants, your staff, the people whose livelihoods depend on Ravencrest's success. And what about my happiness? Does that matter? Of course it matters. Violet felt tears threaten. But what if this is just proximity? What if you think you care for me because I'm different from Lady Penelope, because I represent escape from an unhappy engagement? What if, once the novelty wears off, you realize you've destroyed your life for someone who was never worth it? Nicholas crossed the space between them in 3 strides. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands clenched at his sides as if he was physically restraining himself. Listen to me very carefully. Violet Hartley, I have spent 32 years being told who I should be. The dutiful son, the proper duke, the suitable match. I have smiled through tedious social events, discussed politics I don't care about with men I don't respect, and seriously considered marrying a woman who despises everything I love. His voice dropped. And then you arrived, and for the first time in my life I felt like someone actually saw me. Not the title, not the fortune, not the family name, just me. Nicholas, You challenge me. You make me laugh. You understand things without me having to explain them. When I talk about the horses or the land or books that matter to me, you don't look bored or condescending. You engage. You discuss. You care." He took a shaky breath. "And when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I've felt in years. That's not proximity. That's not novelty. That's—" He stopped, as if the words were too enormous to speak. "That's what?" Violet whispered. "That's love," he said simply. "I love you, Violet. I'm in love with you. And I don't care if it's inconvenient or scandalous or completely impossible by every social standard. It's true." Violet felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "You can't, you shouldn't. Tell me you don't feel the same," Nicholas said. "Tell me the past months have meant nothing to you. Tell me I've imagined every look, every smile, every moment of connection. Tell me that, and I'll never speak of this again." She couldn't. The words wouldn't come. "I can't," she whispered finally. "I can't tell you that, because it would be a lie." The hope that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. "Then what are we going to do about it?" he asked. Before Violet could answer, the library door burst open. Mrs. Ferguson stood in the doorway, her face grave. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but you have another visitor. Lady Penelope has returned." Penelope swept into Ravencrest Hall like an avenging angel in blue silk. Violet watched from the landing above as the younger woman handed her cloak to a footman, surveyed the entrance hall with cold eyes, and announced, "Tell His Grace I'm here, immediately." "Lady Penelope," Nicholas said, emerging from the library. His voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Penelope's smile was sharp. "After the appalling way you behaved, after the insults you leveled at me and my family, did you truly think we would simply accept such treatment and slink away quietly? I didn't think you'd return at all. You made your feelings about Ravencrest quite clear. My feelings about this provincial backwater are irrelevant." Penelope moved closer, lowering her voice but not enough that it didn't carry to where Violet stood hidden on the landing. "What matters is that we have an understanding, Nicholas, an arrangement that has been in place for over a year. My father has business dealings that depend on this alliance. Your family's reputation is entangled with mine. You cannot simply walk away because you've had some sort of rural crisis of conscience." "It's not a crisis of conscience. It's a realization that I cannot marry someone I don't love." Penelope laughed, high, brittle. "Love? Nicholas? We're not children playing at romance. We're adults with responsibilities, families with expectations, futures to secure. Love is a pleasant fiction for the lower classes. People of our station marry for much more practical reasons. Perhaps I'd rather be lower class then." "Don't be absurd." Penelope's patience was clearly wearing thin. "You're being childish, irrational. I'm willing to overlook your embarrassing outburst. We can claim you were unwell, overworked perhaps, but you must come to London. You must apologize to my family, and we must proceed with setting a firm wedding date." "No." The single word dropped like a stone into still water. Penelope's eyes narrowed. "No, I cannot marry you, Penelope. I'm sorry for any inconvenience this causes, but I cannot and will not marry you." "Cannot or will not?" Penelope's voice had turned dangerous. "Or is it that you've found some other entertainment, some other distraction?" Her gaze swept the hall, and for a heart-stopping moment, Violet was certain she'd been spotted on the landing, but Penelope's attention returned to Nicholas. "Mother mentioned rumors," she continued, "whispers about a servant girl. I dismissed them as ridiculous. But now I wonder, is that what this is about? Have you developed some sort of inappropriate attachment? My reasons for ending our engagement are my own." "End it." Penelope's voice rose sharply. "You think you can simply end it? Nicholas, I could destroy you socially. My father has connections you can't imagine. One word from him and doors across England will close in your face. Your horses won't be welcome at any respectable stable. Your voice in Parliament will be meaningless. You'll be a laughingstock, the Duke who threw away a brilliant match for what? For nothing." "For my own peace of mind," Nicholas said quietly. "For the chance to build a life that's actually mine. For love, if you must know. Not that you'd understand what that means." Penelope's face went white, then red. "You'll regret this. I promise you, Nicholas Ravenscroft, you will regret this decision for the rest of your miserable life." "Perhaps. But it will still be better than marrying you." The slap echoed through the entrance hall like a gunshot. Nicholas stood very still, a red mark blooming on his cheek, his expression unchanged. "Get out," he said quietly. With pleasure. Penelope grabbed her cloak from the startled footman. But hear this. I will make certain everyone knows what you've done, how you broke faith with my family, how you've disgraced yourself over some rural nobody. You think scandal won't touch you because you're a duke. You're wrong. By the time I'm finished, you'll be a cautionary tale. She swept out, the door slamming behind her. Nicholas remained standing in the now silent hall, one hand touching his reddened cheek almost absently. Mrs. Ferguson appeared from the servants' ass corridor. Your Grace? I'm fine, Mrs. Ferguson. Nicholas's voice was strangely calm, though I think Miss Hartley and I need to speak. Is she? He looked up at the landing where Violet stood frozen. Their eyes met across the space. My study, he said quietly. Please. Violet descended the stairs on trembling legs. She followed Nicholas into his study, a room she'd never entered before, lined with maps and estate ledgers and more evidence of the weight he carried. He closed the door behind them and leaned against it, suddenly looking exhausted. Well, he said, that's done then. The engagement is broken. Publicly, dramatically, and irrevocably. Nicholas, what have you done? Violet's voice was barely above a whisper. What I should have done months ago. He moved to the window, staring out at the winter gardens. Lord Ashworth was right, I needed to decide, and I've decided I'm not marrying Penelope. Whatever the consequences will be severe. I know. She'll ruin you socially. I know that too. And your mother, when she hears, will likely be furious. Nicholas turned to face her. But I'm 32 years old, Violet. I'm the Duke of Ravencrest, and I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations. Violet's throat was tight. This can't be about me. You can't have destroyed your engagement, your social standing, your future, all for me. That's too much. It's too much responsibility. It's not just about you. Nicholas crossed to where she stood. It's about me, about finally having the courage to choose happiness over duty, about refusing to spend my life in a miserable marriage, because it's what's expected. He paused. But yes, knowing you, understanding what love could actually feel like, that gave me the strength to walk away. But now what? Violet felt panic rising. Now you're free. But I'm still bound by my father's debt. I'm still here as a servant. For another year and a half. How can anything between us be real when that's the foundation? Nicholas went very still. I hadn't thought. You're right. As long as you're here to work off your father's debt, any relationship between us would be... He stopped, clearly struggling with the implications. Would be exploitation, Violet finished quietly. No matter what we feel, no matter what we want, I'm not truly free to choose. Not while I'm obligated to be here. The silence that fell was heavy with the weight of this realization. Then we make you free, Nicholas said finally. What? Your father's debt. £300. I'll forgive it completely. Today you can leave Ravencrest if you choose. Return to your family. Make your own decisions without obligation hanging over you. Violet stared at him. You can't just... That's not how this works. Why not? It's my debt to forgive, and I'm forgiving it. Nicholas's voice was firm. You'll stay on as my employee if you wish. Proper salary, proper position as librarian, or you can leave. The choice is yours. But I won't have you stay out of obligation. My father will receive a letter from my solicitor tomorrow, officially releasing him from the debt. I'll word it carefully, make it clear this decision was made before any personal feelings developed, to correct an arrangement that was unjust from the beginning. Nicholas met her eyes, and then, once you're truly free, once you have real choice, if you want to explore what might be between us, we can, properly, with no coercion, no obligation, just two people who might love each other, trying to determine if they can build a life together. Violet felt tears spill over. This is insane. You've just ended your engagement, threatened your social standing, and now you're forgiving a £300 debt all in one afternoon. Have you lost your mind? Possibly. Nicholas smiled slightly. But I've never felt saner. For the first time in years, I'm making choices that are actually mine. Does that make me mad? Yes, Violet said. Then, despite everything, but perhaps the best kind of mad. The next week was chaos. Letters arrived daily from London, some supportive, many condemning. Lord Ashworth wrote with updates. The scandal was indeed enormous. Society was divided between those who thought Nicholas brave for following his heart and those who thought him a fool for throwing away a brilliant match. Lady Penelope had made good on her threats, spreading her version of events liberally. The word bewitched appeared in multiple letters. Some claimed Violet had deliberately seduced Nicholas. Others suggested she'd used some sort of rural witchcraft. French, Molly reported breathlessly after a trip to the village. But Mrs. Patterson at the bakery swears you're French, and that you practice dark arts learned from your foreign mother. My mother is from Kent, Violet said wearily. I tried telling her that, but she wouldn't listen. Said Kent is practically foreign anyway. Through it all, Nicholas remained calm. He wrote letters, met with his solicitor, handled estate business with the same steady competence he'd always shown, but Violet could see the strain around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and she could see the determination. He wasn't going to change his mind, wasn't going to apologize or backtrack or try to salvage things with the Danburys. He'd made his choice. The letter to her father went out, officially forgiving the debt. Nicholas showed it to Violet before sealing it. Mr. Hartley, after careful consideration, I have determined that the arrangement regarding your daughter's service at Ravencrest Hall was unjust from its inception. A debt incurred through misfortune should not be satisfied through a family member's labor. Therefore, I hereby forgive the full amount owed £300 with no conditions attached. Your daughter is free to remain at Ravencrest as a paid employee, should she choose, or to return to your household. The decision is entirely hers. This action is taken to correct an improper arrangement and has no connection to any other considerations, heirs, etc. Nicholas Ravenscroft, Duke of Ravencrest, has no connection to any other considerations, Violet read aloud. That's a careful phrasing. Has no connection to any other considerations, Violet read aloud. That's a careful phrasing. My solicitor insisted, to make it clear that I'm not, he hesitated, that I'm not trying to buy your affection, that this is righting a wrong, nothing more. And is that all it is? No, Nicholas met her eyes, but it's how it needs to appear, for both our sakes. The response from Violet's family came a week later. Her mother's handwriting, careful and emotional. Dearest Violet, we received His Grace's letter and can scarce believe the generosity shown. Your father wept when he read it. The burden of guilt he has carried these months lifted at last. But my darling girl, what does this mean for you? His letter says you're free to come home. Are you? Or are there reasons, other reasons to remain? I confess, I've worried about you these past months. Your letters were cheerful, but something in them troubled me. And now, this extraordinary kindness from the Duke. Come home if you wish. Your room is waiting. But if there's something more keeping you there, someone more, know that we will support whatever choice you make. Even if society condemns it, even if the path is difficult, you are our daughter, and we love you. That will never change. Mama Violet read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had seen. Somehow, through carefully worded letters, Maggie Hartley had understood. What will you do? Mrs. Ferguson asked gently, finding Violet in the library with the letter clutched in her hands. I don't know, Violet admitted. If I stay, it will fuel the scandal, give ammunition to everyone saying I seduced him, that I'm a fortune hunter. But if I leave, if you leave, you'll wonder for the rest of your life what might have been, Mrs. Ferguson finished, and so will he. Is it worth it, though? The scandal, the condemnation, the doors that will close? That depends, lass. The housekeeper sat beside her. Do you love him? Yes. The word came without hesitation. God help me, yes. And does he love you? He says he does. I don't mean what he says. What do you see? When you look at him, when he looks at you, what do you see? Violet thought of Nicholas in the library, discussing poetry, in the stable with Midnight, patient and gentle, standing up to the Danburys despite the consequences, offering to free her from her obligation even if it meant she might leave. I see someone who understands me, she said quietly, who sees me not as a servant or a debt payment, but as an equal, who values what I think, what I feel, who I am. She looked at Mrs. Ferguson. Is that foolish? To think we could make this work despite everything against us? Perhaps. But sometimes the most important things are foolish. Mrs. Ferguson squeezed her hand. My own daughter married for practical reasons. A good man, steady income, sensible choice, and she's content. But she's not happy, not the way I was with my late husband. He was a second son with no prospects. I was a housekeeper. Everyone said we were mad, but we had 30 years of joy before he died. I'm frightened, Violet whispered. Good. That means you understand the stakes. But fear shouldn't be the only thing guiding your choice, lass. Sometimes you need courage too. That evening, Violet found Nicholas in the stable, not with Midnight this time, but with Moonstone and her filly. Violet's star was growing rapidly, all long legs and curiosity, investigating everything in her stall with the fearlessness of the very young. "She's beautiful," Violet said softly. Nicholas turned, and the hope in his eyes when he saw her made Violet's heart ache. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I needed to think about everything." Violet came to stand beside him at the stall. "I received a letter from my family. My mother says I'm free to come home, that they'll support whatever choice I make." She felt Nicholas go very still beside her. "And what choice have you made?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the fear underneath. "I'm terrified," Violet said, "of the scandal, of the judgment, of failing you, failing myself, failing everyone who believes in us." "Violet, but I'm more terrified," she continued, turning to face him, "of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been, of being safe and proper and respectable, and completely empty inside because I chose fear over courage." The hope in his face was transforming into something brighter. So I'm staying," Violet said. "Not as a servant, not as payment for my father's debt, but as your employee, your friend, and—" She took a shaky breath. "And as someone who loves you, if you'll have me." Nicholas's response was to pull her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'll have you," he whispered against her hair. "In any capacity you're willing. For as long as you'll stay." They stood like that for a long moment, the filly watching them with curious eyes, the stable warm and quiet around them. "It won't be easy," Nicholas said finally, pulling back to look at her. "The scandal will be enormous. Some doors will close, people will be cruel. I know. My mother will likely be difficult, at least at first. I know that too. And there are no guarantees. We might—" He struggled with the words. "We might fail, this might not work, but we might succeed," Violet countered. "We might build something extraordinary. Isn't that possibility worth the risk?" Nicholas smiled, the first truly unguarded, joyful smile she'd seen on his face in weeks. "Yes, God, yes." "Then we try," Violet said. "Together, whatever comes." "Together," Nicholas agreed. He leaned down to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promise. A beginning, not an ending. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Violet laughed shakily. "Your mother is going to hate me." "Probably. At first." Nicholas grinned. "But she'll come around. Eventually. I hope." "When do we tell her?" "Soon. But first—" He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "First, let's just have this moment, before the storm hits. Just us." They stood together in the quiet stable, hands clasped, the filly dozing in her stall, the winter twilight painting everything in shades of blue and gold. The storm was coming. Violet knew that. The scandal, the judgment, the difficulties they'd face. But standing here with Nicholas, his hand warm in hers, his eyes full of love and determination, she thought perhaps they could weather it, together. The letter arrived 3 days after Violet and Nicholas's conversation in the stable. It was written on heavy cream paper, sealed with the Ravenscroft family crest, and addressed in an elegant, decisive hand that suggested its author was accustomed to being obeyed. "Nicholas, dear, I have heard the most extraordinary rumors concerning your broken engagement and some sort of unsuitable attachment. Rather than rely on gossip, I am coming to Ravencrest to assess the situation myself. I arrive Tuesday next. Have the Rose Room prepared. Your mother, Helena Ravenscroft, Dowager Duchess of Ravencrest." Nicholas read the letter aloud to Violet in the library, his expression somewhere between resignation and dread. "She's coming to assess the situation," Violet repeated. "That sounds ominous. That's my mother, direct, imperious, and accustomed to getting her way." Nicholas set the letter down with a sigh. She championed the match with Penelope. Thought her perfect Duchess material. Well-bred, beautiful, connected to all the right families. And now you've thrown away that perfect match for a bankrupt merchant's daughter who came here as a servant. Violet tried to keep her voice steady. "She's going to hate me. She's going to be difficult," Nicholas corrected. "But she's not unreasonable. Once she meets you, once she sees—" "Sees what?" "That I can dust a library. That I'm good with traumatized horses." Violet stood, agitation driving her to pace. "Nicholas, I have no illusions about what I am. I'm educated, yes, but by my mother, not governesses and finishing schools. I can't embroider. I've never been presented at court. I don't know which fork to use at a formal dinner. How can I possibly convince your mother I'm suitable to be a duchess? Nicholas caught her hand as she paced past, pulling her to a stop. You convince her by being exactly who you are, intelligent, brave, kind, genuine. His grip tightened. My mother values authenticity above all else. She'll see through any pretense immediately. So don't pretend. Just be Violet. Just be Violet, she echoed weakly. The woman who's causing a massive scandal and potentially ruining her son's life. The woman I love, Nicholas corrected firmly. Remember that. Whatever my mother says, whatever she threatens, I love you. That's not changing. Violet wanted to believe him, but as Tuesday approached, dread settled in her stomach like a stone. The Dowager Duchess Helena Ravenscroft arrived precisely on schedule, in an imposing black carriage that seemed to darken the sunny afternoon. Violet watched from her window as the woman descended. Tall and slender despite her 60 years, the Dowager moved with the confidence of someone who'd commanded households and intimidated lesser mortals for decades. Her traveling dress was severe, black silk that whispered wealth without ostentation. Her silver hair was swept into an elaborate coiffure that must have taken her maid hours to perfect, and her face, still beautiful in its maturity, was set in an expression of cool assessment. She looked like a woman who suffered no fools. Nicholas greeted his mother formally on the front steps. Violet couldn't hear their exchange, but she saw the Dowager's sharp eyes sweep over her son, cataloguing every detail, before she nodded once and allowed him to escort her inside. Mrs. Ferguson appeared at Violet's door. Her Grace has requested tea in the drawing room in 1 hour. You're to attend. Violet's stomach dropped. Already? She doesn't believe in wasting time, that one. The housekeeper's expression was sympathetic. Wear your best dress, lass, and remember, you've faced worse than one disapproving aristocrat. Have I? Violet asked weakly. You've survived being sent away from your family to work off your father's debts. You've earned the respect of everyone in this household. You've helped a traumatized horse learn to trust again. And you've had the courage to love a duke, despite knowing the consequences. Mrs. Ferguson squeezed her shoulder. You're stronger than you know. Now show her that strength. 60 minutes later, Violet descended to the drawing room in her best grey dress. Still simple, still clearly marking her as something other than gentry, but clean and well-made and dignified. The Dowager sat by the fire, teacup balanced perfectly on her knee. Nicholas stood by the window, tension visible in every line of his body. Miss Hartley, the Dowager said. Her voice was cultured, cool, assessing. Come, sit. Let me look at you properly. Violet sat in the chair across from her, back straight, hands folded in her lap, meeting the older woman's gaze directly despite her hammering heart. The Dowager studied her in silence for a long, uncomfortable moment. Those sharp eyes missed nothing, cataloguing Violet's simple dress, her unadorned hair, her work-roughened hands. My son tells me you were sent here as payment for your father's debts, the Dowager said finally. Yes, Your Grace. And that you've been serving as a sort of librarian and lady's companion. Yes, Your Grace. And now, apparently, you've become something more. Something that has caused my son to break a highly advantageous engagement and create an enormous scandal. The Dowager's tone was absolutely neutral, giving away nothing. Tell me, Miss Hartley, do you love my son, or do you love his title and fortune? The directness of the question was like a slap. Behind the Dowager, Nicholas started forward. Mother, I'm asking Miss Hartley, Nicholas, not you. Those sharp eyes never left Violet's face. Well, girl, Violet could have given a safe answer, could have demurred, played coy, been properly modest, but Mrs. Ferguson's words echoed in her mind. Be exactly who you are. I love your son, Your Grace, Violet said clearly. Not the Duke of Ravencrest, though I respect what that title represents and the responsibilities it carries, but Nicholas, the man who loses himself in books and understands what they truly mean, who speaks to horses with patience and gentleness, who values knowledge and despises cruelty, who chose truth over convenience, even knowing the cost. She met the Dowager's eyes steadily. That's who I love, and if he were penniless and titleless, I would love him still. The Dowager's expression didn't change. Pretty words, but how do I know they're true? You don't, Violet said simply. You can't know what's in my heart any more than I can prove it to you with words. You'll have to judge by my actions, by how I treat your son, by whether I make him happy or miserable, by whether I'm worthy of the trust he's placed in me. She paused, and by whether I have the courage to face people exactly like you, who assume the worst of me because of where I come from. For the first time, something flickered in the dowager's expression. Are people exactly like me? Yes, Your Grace. People who look at my simple dress and common background and assume I must be scheming, grasping, calculating, who can't imagine that someone like me might genuinely care for someone like Nicholas, not for what he can give me, but for who he is. A long-waited silence fell. Then, unexpectedly, the dowager smiled. It transformed her severe face completely. Do you know, child, you remind me of someone. Myself, 35 years ago. Violet blinked. I beg your pardon. Nicholas, the dowager said, still looking at Violet. Did you ever tell Miss Hartley about your grandparents, about how they met? No, Nicholas said, sounding confused. I didn't think. Of course you didn't. Men never do. The dowager set down her teacup with precise care. Miss Hartley, my maiden name was Seymour. My family was wealthy, very wealthy, but not titled. Merchants originally, though by my generation we'd climbed far enough to be considered gentry. Barely. Violet's eyes widened. When I was 22, I met Edward Ravenscroft at a country house party. He was newly come into the dukedom after his father's death, young, handsome, and drowning in debt, because his father had been a gambler and a fool. The dowager's voice softened with memory. My family wanted me to marry the Earl of Westbrook, older, richer, better connected, more suitable. I told them all to go to hell. Mother, Nicholas sounded genuinely shocked. I never knew, because I don't speak of it, ancient history. But the dowager's eyes remained on Violet. Edward's family was horrified. A Seymour, a merchant's granddaughter, diluting the ancient bloodline. They tried everything to prevent the marriage. Threats, ultimatums, social pressure. His mother, your grandmother, Nicholas, actually cut him off financially for 2 years. Good God, Nicholas breathed. We married anyway, in a small ceremony with half the pews empty, because so many people refused to attend. The dowager's smile was fierce now, and we had 37 years of genuine happiness before he died, 37 years of partnership and love, and building something real together. We restored Ravencrest's fortunes, raised a son who inherited the best of both of us, and never once regretted our choice. She turned to Nicholas. Your father told you, I believe, as he was dying, to find what we had. Did you think I'd forgotten that? Did you think I'd become so rigid in my old age that I'd deny you the same chance we took? But Penelope, you championed that match, because I thought you were resigned to duty over happiness, because you seemed content with a practical arrangement. The dowager's voice turned sharp, but the moment I heard you'd actually broken it off, had the courage to defy expectations, I knew you'd found something worth fighting for. She turned back to Violet. So yes, I came to assess the situation, to see if this girl was worthy of the scandal she's causing. And I'll tell you what I see. I see someone brave enough to speak honestly, even knowing I might crush her. Someone who loves my son for who he is, not what he has. Someone who reminds me very much of myself at her age. She paused. You'll do, Miss Hartley. You'll do quite well. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. Your Grace. However, the dowager continued, her tone turning businesslike, you need to understand what you're getting into. Society will be vicious. Some doors will close permanently. People will say terrible things about you, and about Nicholas for choosing you. Can you bear that, truly? Violet thought of her grandfather, respected despite his humble birth because of his skill and character, thought of her mother, who'd married for love and never regretted it, thought of her own strength, tested and proven over months of hardship. Yes, Your Grace, she said firmly. I can bear it. Good. The dowager actually smiled. Then welcome to the family, Miss Hartley. Conditional welcome, mind you. If you make my son miserable, I'll make your life extremely difficult. But if you make him happy, her expression softened, then you'll have no fiercer defender than me. 2 weeks later, the Hartley family made the journey from Kent to Derbyshire. Violet paced the entrance hall nervously, smoothing her dress for the 100th time. Nicholas waited beside her, equally anxious despite his attempts to appear calm. They're going to think this is madness, Violet muttered. My father is going to forbid it. My mother is going to cry. Lily is going to... Violet, Nicholas caught her hand. Breathe. Your mother's letters suggested she already suspected something. And your father, whatever he thinks, he loves you. Give him a chance. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Violet's heart leaped into her throat. The Hartley family emerged. William looking overwhelmed by the grandeur of Ravencrest, Maggie quiet and observant, and Lily, sweet 8-year-old Lily, staring at everything with huge eyes. "Vi!" Lily shrieked, propriety forgotten, and ran to throw herself into Violet's arms. Violet caught her sister, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and little girl, feeling tears threaten. "So I've missed you, little one. This place is like a palace," Lily said, pulling back to stare at the house. "Are you a princess now? Do you live here forever?" "Not quite," Violet said, laughing through her tears. "But come, let me introduce you properly to His Grace." Nicholas bowed to Lily with perfect seriousness. "Miss Lily, I've heard a great deal about you. Your sister speaks of you constantly." Lily giggled, delighted. But William's expression was far less pleased. He studied Nicholas with the wary eyes of a father who'd watched his daughter sent away to work off his debts, who'd heard rumors of scandal, who wasn't entirely sure what to believe. Over tea in the drawing room, with the Dowager Duchess pointedly present as chaperone and support, Nicholas addressed William directly. "Mr. Hartley, I've asked you here because I wish to formally request permission to court your daughter." William's teacup clinked against its saucer. "Court her?" "Yes, sir. Your Grace." William's voice was tight. "Forgive my bluntness, but I'm a ruined merchant whose daughter was sent here as a servant. You're a duke. How is this anything but disaster waiting to happen?" "William," Maggie murmured. "No, let him speak," Nicholas said quietly. "Mr. Hartley has every right to his concerns." William set down his teacup with careful precision. "My daughter deserves happiness, security, a life where she's respected, not scorned. Can you offer those things when society will call her a fortune hunter, when your peers will cut her, when she'll forever be marked as the servant who seduced a duke?" "I can't control what society says," Nicholas admitted. "I can't prevent gossip or close doors, but I can offer Violet my complete devotion, my partnership in building a life together, my promise to stand beside her through whatever comes, to never be ashamed of her, to defend her honor with everything I have." He looked at Violet, then back at her father. "I love your daughter, sir, truly and deeply. She makes me want to be better. She challenges me, supports me, understands me in ways no one else ever has. That's rarer than any fortune." "And the debt?" William's voice was rough. "The £300? The reason she came here in the first place? Already forgiven. Completely." Nicholas gestured to a document on the table. "My solicitor prepared this formally. The debt is cleared with no conditions attached. Violet is free to leave Ravencrest if she chooses, free to reject my suit if she wishes. There's no obligation keeping her here." William stared at the document, his hands trembling slightly. You've forgiven it all." "I have. The original arrangement was unjust. Your daughter should never have been sent away as payment for misfortune. I'm simply correcting a wrong that should never have existed." Maggie reached over and took her husband's hand. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "William, look at our daughter." William turned to Violet. She knew what he saw, the glow in her eyes, the happiness she couldn't quite hide, the love written plainly on her face. His shoulders sagged. "You're certain, truly certain this is what you want?" "Yes, Papa," Violet said softly, "more certain than I've ever been about anything." "And you?" William turned to Nicholas, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "If you hurt her, I won't, sir." "On my honor as a gentleman and my word as a man, I won't." A long silence stretched. Then finally William nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing?" His voice cracked. "God help you both, but you have my blessing." Lily, who'd been sitting very quietly trying to understand the adult conversation, suddenly bounced in her seat. "Does this mean Vi will be a duchess? A real duchess?" "Eventually," the Dowager said, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "Say if things proceed as planned. That's like a fairy tale." Lily's eyes were huge. "Will there be a wedding? Can I come? Will there be cake?" "Yes to all of those," Nicholas said, grinning, "especially the cake." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Derbyshire society had ever witnessed. Nicholas made no attempt to hide his intentions. He and Violet walked together through the village, rode through the estate, attended church sitting side by side in the Ravenscroft family pew, a statement of intent that scandalized half the congregation and intrigued the other half. Letters poured in from London, some supportive. Lord Ashworth wrote frequently with updates and encouragement, others condemning. Former friends cut ties, invitations ceased, Doors closed, but other doors opened. The local vicar, surprisingly, proved an ally. "I've watched His Grace these 5 years since he inherited," Reverend Thomas said after Sunday service. "Never seen him as happy as he is now. That's not nothing." The tenants on the estate, who'd always respected Nicholas's fair management, expressed quiet approval. "Better a good woman who makes him happy than some London lady who'd never appreciate what we do here," one of the farmers told Mrs. Ferguson. And slowly, very slowly, a few members of the gentry began to soften. Not acceptance, not yet, but acknowledgement. A nod in passing, a cautious greeting, small cracks in the wall of scandal. The dowager proved instrumental, using her connections ruthlessly to manage the narrative. "My son fell in love with a respectable young woman of good character," she told anyone who would listen. "The circumstances of their meeting are irrelevant. What matters is that they're suited to each other in every way that counts." She also took Violet under her wing, beginning a crash course in being a duchess. "You don't need to become someone else," Helena explained during one of their sessions, "but you do need to understand the world you're entering. The expectations, the unspoken rules, the political dynamics. Knowledge is armor. Use it." Violet absorbed it all. Etiquette, household management, the complex web of aristocratic relationships. It was overwhelming, occasionally humiliating when she made mistakes, but Helena was a surprisingly patient teacher. "You're doing well," the dowager said one afternoon after Violet had successfully navigated a particularly tricky point of precedence. "Better than I did at first, truth be told. At least you're willing to learn instead of stubbornly insisting your way is better." "I was stubborn," Violet asked, smiling. "Insufferable. Your grandfather-in-law wanted to disown me weekly, but I wore him down eventually." Helena's eyes gleamed with mischief. "You will too. The ones who truly matter will come around." 3 months after the Danburys' departure, on a warm April evening, Nicholas took Violet to the stables. Moonstone and Violet Star stood together in the paddock, the filly having grown into a beautiful young horse, with her mother's elegance and a spirit all her own. "She's magnificent," Violet said, watching the filly prance around the enclosure. "You were right to believe in her. I believed in both of you," Nicholas said quietly. He turned to face her. "Violet, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've challenged me, supported me, stood beside me through scandal and gossip and closed doors. You've made me laugh, made me think, made me want to be better than I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Violet's breath caught. "I know I'm supposed to have done this through proper channels first, written to your father, arranged everything formally, but we've never been conventional, have we?" He opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple but beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "This was my grandmother's, the grandmother who cut my grandfather off for 2 years for marrying my merchant's daughter grandmother." Despite the emotion flooding through her, Violet laughed. "They made it work," Nicholas continued. "Against all odds, against all expectations, they built something real and lasting. And I want to build that with you." He dropped to one knee in the spring grass. "Violet Elizabeth Hartley, will you marry me? Will you be my duchess, my partner, my love, for whatever life brings?" Tears streamed down Violet's face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." Nicholas stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the evening light. Then he kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise, while Violet Star whinnied approval in the background. The wedding took place on a perfect June morning. They'd chosen the village church rather than London, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes about their priorities. The pews were filled not with hundreds of society's elite, but with the people who actually mattered: estate workers, village families, servants who'd become friends, Lord Ashworth looking proud as a father, and the Dowager Duchess sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. Violet walked down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing a simple gown of ivory silk, no elaborate train, no hundreds of pearls, just elegant simplicity that suited her perfectly. Her mother had woven wildflowers into her hair, and she carried a bouquet from Ravencrest's gardens. Nicholas waited at the altar in his formal attire, and when he saw her, the love in his eyes was so profound it took her breath away. The ceremony was traditional, but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, their voices were steady and sure. "I, Nicholas Edward Ravenscroft, take thee, Violet Elizabeth Hartley. I, Violet Elizabeth Hartley, take thee, Nicholas Edward Ravenscroft." Promises made before God and witnesses, promises they both meant with every fibre of their beings. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Nicholas kissed her with such tenderness that several guests audibly sighed. As they walked back down the aisle together, the Duke and new Duchess of Ravencrest, Violet saw faces she knew, Mrs. Ferguson openly weeping with joy, Molly and Annie grinning, her mother dabbing her eyes, her father looking simultaneously proud and emotional, and Lily practically bouncing with excitement. Outside the church, instead of an elaborate reception, they'd arranged a garden party at Ravencrest. Simple but beautiful, tables laden with food, flowers everywhere, music playing, more celebration than spectacle. Lord Ashworth raised a glass. To the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest, may they prove that love and courage matter more than convention. Hear, hear. The response echoed across the garden. The Dowager Duchess approached Violet as the sun began to set, pulling her into an unexpected embrace. Welcome to the family, my dear. Officially this time. Thank you, Helena. Violet had been given permission to use the Dowager's first name in private. For everything. For accepting me. For defending us. For recognizing that my son had found what his father and I had. Helena smiled. That wasn't generosity, child. That was self-interest. I want my son happy. And you make him happy. She glanced over to where Nicholas stood talking with Lord Ashworth, his face more relaxed and joyful than Violet had ever seen it. Look at him. I haven't seen him this unguarded in years. That's your doing. He does the same for me, Violet said softly. I know. That's why this works. Helena squeezed her hand. There will still be difficulties ahead. Some people will never accept you. Some doors will remain closed. But you have what matters, each other, and those of us who truly love you. As twilight fell over Ravencrest, Violet found herself standing with Nicholas on the terrace, watching their guests celebrate below. Happy? He asked, sliding his arm around her waist. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Violet admitted. She looked down at the ring on her finger, now joined by a simple gold wedding band. A year ago, I arrived here terrified and alone, sent away to work off my father's debts. I thought my life was over. And now I'm standing here as your wife, as the Duchess of Ravencrest, about to begin a future I never dared dream of. She looked up at him. It still doesn't feel quite real. It's real, Nicholas assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And it's only the beginning. 1 year later, the nursery at Ravencrest was filled with afternoon sunlight when Violet entered, carrying her 2-week-old son in her arms. James William Ravenscroft had arrived on a warm May morning with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire household. He had his father's dark hair and, according to the Dowager, who'd arrived within days of his birth, the Ravenscroft nose. Though he has your eyes, thankfully, Helena had said, making Violet laugh. Nicholas appeared in the nursery doorway, still slightly dishevelled from his morning ride, his face lit up seeing them. How is he? Finally sleeping, Violet whispered, after keeping us both up most of the night. Nicholas crossed to them, wrapping his arms around both wife and son. He's perfect. You're perfect. All of this is perfect. Violet leaned into his embrace, feeling the profound rightness of this moment. A year of marriage had only deepened their connection. They'd faced challenges. Some members of society still refused to acknowledge Violet. Certain events remained closed to them, but they'd faced everything together. Did you hear the news from Newmarket? Nicholas asked. About Violet's star? Violet smiled. Mrs. Ferguson told me this morning. She won by 3 lengths, decisively. Nicholas's pride was evident. Lord Ashworth wrote that she was magnificent. The breeding program is being validated. We're getting inquiries from estates across England. Your dream coming true. One of them. He kissed her temple. The others are already here. Through the window, they could see the Ravencrest estate stretching away in the summer sunshine. The gardens Violet had helped redesign. The stables where Midnight now served as a gentle riding horse for guests. The library where she still spent hours, now managing Nicholas's correspondence and helping with estate business. Do you regret it? Nicholas asked quietly. The closed doors. The people who still won't accept you. The gossip that flares up occasionally. Violet looked at their son, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Looked at her husband, whose love had never wavered despite every obstacle. Thought of the life they'd built together, full of meaning and partnership and joy. Not for a single moment, she said honestly. This, right here, right now, is everything I never knew I wanted, everything I didn't dare hope for. A soft knock at the door. Mrs. Ferguson peeked in. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but you have visitors. The Dowager Duchess has arrived with Miss Lily. The young lady is quite insistent about meeting her nephew immediately. Violet laughed. Send them up. James needs to meet his aunt properly. As the housekeeper disappeared, Nicholas squeezed Violet's shoulder, ready for the chaos. Always. As long as you're beside me. Always, he promised. And as the sound of Lily's excited chatter grew closer, as the Dowager's amused voice responded, as their household filled with the noise and warmth of family, Violet felt complete. The journey from terrified girl sent away to work off her father's debts to Duchess of Ravencrest had been unexpected, difficult, and occasionally heartbreaking. But standing here in the nursery at Ravencrest, with her son in her arms and her husband beside her, with family arriving and a future full of promise stretching ahead, Violet knew with absolute certainty that every challenge, every tear, every moment of fear had been worth it. She'd found not just love, but partnership, not just security, but genuine happiness, not just a position, but a home, and that was worth everything. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel, leaving a like, sharing it with friends, and writing a comment below. Your support means everything to us and keeps us inspired to tell more stories filled with love, resilience, redemption, and second chances. At the end of this video, you'll find another unforgettable romance from our collection. Click and discover where the next story will take you. With all our appreciation, the Empire of Heart Stories team.